Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lawsplaining the Interwebs. I am your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And with me today is a guest I'm very honored to have on the stream, Mr. Ross Scott. Hey, buddy, how's it going?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Ross just did a video that many of you have seen. Actually, tons of people have told me to go watch the video, and that is this video. It's entitled "Games as a Service is Fraud," and which is them's fighting words, them's fighting
Yeah,
words
well,
to the gaming
I,
industry, and I think I 100% agree with them.
I
Um,
I thought the argument was there when I wrote that. Could be wrong, but well, that's why I'm here.
well, here's the thing that I've learned in my time as a lawyer. There's what the law says, there's what we want the law to say, and then there's what the law should say. And your argument should always fall in one of those things. It doesn't always matter which one it is. Now, I mean, you run a guy over with your car, what the law says really matters. But when
Well,
we're
a lot of those things are going to align too.
right.
It's like, well, he says you should lock him up. Yeah, everybody seems to think we should lock him up.
Yeah, and but when we're talking about the nature of products in an economic market that hasn't had products that behave in the same way, and it does have implication in other areas, we have to start deciding not only what the law says, what we want the law to say, what the law should say. And this is when you're arguing in court, even when you have what the law says. Sometimes your argument is, but that's stupid that the law says that. In this situation, public policy would dictate that we should take this in a different direction. So I think most of the critics I've seen of your video are getting hung up in these sort of almost pedantic discussions about, well, what the law is or isn't. And I don't mean to downplay those discussions by using the word pedantic. But some of the criticism out there is, well, you got this particular portion of the law incorrect, or a very friendly correction from Leor was that YouTuber Law was that your video, the citations that you used in your video might have pertained to a different thing. In this case, the first sale doctrine, as opposed to this issue of ongoing ownership and maintenance that you're focusing on. And so he kind of dismisses those citations, which is probably true if you're going to run into court with just the citations you provided. You would have an uphill battle.
Yeah, I mean, it's valid if that's the interpretation, and judges are going to take that same interpretation.
Well, the trick is always to convince judges that the interpretation is not correct, and that your interpretation is better under the circumstances. Now, it doesn't always work, but what you would do is, if you were bringing this case, of course, you would take the base work that you've done and you'd increase it and increase it and increase it and talk about public policy. When you're making an argument as grand as this,
yeah,
you would bring in stuff like polls. You would bring in survey after survey. You would bring in your spreadsheet with the list of all the games that have been completely disabled. Something like 95% of
yeah.
games.
And honestly, that's the short version, because if you were to include games that had a single player portion and also multiplayer portion, and they killed the multiplayer, that list goes hundreds higher.
Right.
So,
And these days we're getting stuff. You mentioned Star Siege Tribes, which is a
yeah.
fantastic game. Lots of fun. But the thing with Tribes was that there was ostensibly a single player Tribes for a while. It was just absolute garbage. It was like a sort of a tutorial, and that's about it.
Oh,
But there are many games that have that, where the single player is a complete hack job.
I thought Star Siege Tribes didn't even have bots. It was just
No, and I don't. I mean, I think it was the original Tribes, and it had some single player, and it was like a tutorial option. It was not
Okay.
anything like the multiplayer
Oh,
game at
so
all.
well, yeah, I was fudging a bit there, and I knew it on that part because you technically can open that up and just have an empty map that you can run around in. So, however, it's like the game arguably has extremely little value without other players,
Right,
but
right. Yeah,
you're
and
in control. You can connect to other players, you know? You get some
exactly.
friends or community members who like it. You can still play that now, and that game's not supported in any fashion whatsoever, I don't think. So,
Right. And so what I'm with you on this, and I think that we should talk about some of the solutions that Lior was talking about. I have a little bit of criticism of them, although I think he's hitting on some of the right veins. But what I don't want to do is rehash what Lior said. He's good. Lior's a good
yeah, I
attorney.
like
This
his
is
analysis.
right, and this is in his wheelhouse. He writes those user agreements we all hate. and and so that's fantastic. So he brings a good perspective to it. I think that might, and again, this is not a slight, but that might bias his perspective a little bit, saying that it's not the termination provision of the EULA that's the problem. I mean, I think it is. I think it largely is the problem. But I don't want to just rehash what Lior said. So why don't we do kind of an overview, and I'll let you do
Yeah,
a short summary of games as a service, and then we can kind of get into the meat of that discussion, and I'll talk about Lior's analysis, and if there's something I missed from it that you wanted to hit on, we can do that as well, and then we'll kind of just riff on how things are going. But
yeah,
first, I need to learn more about you. I'm kind of jumping the gun here
sure.
because YouTube is a wide world, and you have a channel that's been around a long time. You produce content that a lot of people that watch me really enjoy. But I'll confess, I'd never heard of your channel, as I assume
That's
you'd
fine.
never heard of mine, and that's how the internet goes. So if you could tell me kind of how you got into all this and what your background is, I'd really appreciate that.
Sure. I came into YouTube very much by accident. It started off with me making what are called machinima videos, where you make a video using a game engine or resources to make it.
Sure.
Uh, I made a show called Civil Protection, where I took characters from Half-Life 2 and just kind of made kind of goofy skits with them. And then later, as an experiment, my most popular thing was called Freeman's Mind, where what I did was this is an experiment. Gordon Freeman is a famous silent protagonist, so I decided to just fill in just every space of playing through the game with just thoughts he might be having. It just really kind of turned up the amped up his personality, made him kind of paranoid, a little egocentric, kind of concerned with petty things. That just because I was thinking, well, who might survive like a catastrophic event? Maybe someone who actually is extremely paranoid just already,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and so I just kind of ran with that and made it as funny as I could, kind of like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing, just from that character's perspective. You know, I treat it all like it's real for him and making jokes, and that ended up being quite popular, much more than it's probably the most popular thing I'll do, even though. But this this latest video, so I've mostly been, and then later I still do that and another show called Ross's Game Dungeon, which uh, it is sort of a review show, but I realize now it's more like a tour. Like I'll find kind of weird or interesting games or ones I have a lot of thoughts on, and just I kind of go through it like I'm a tour guide or safari thing, and just try to make it fun to watch.
I noticed
Mhm.
right on the front of your YouTube page, you have one of those the guides of Carn Evil, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
one of the most horrifically money destroying games I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, yeah, but man, it draws people in. I mean, it's
It's one. It's
well, because I love carnival stuff, and then they give the horror vibe, and then just make it a roller coaster sort of rail shooter thing out of it, which I don't know, I loved it. So
yeah, but like there's that teleporting clown with the bowling pin, And if you can't tag that guy, he will come up and just go bloop bloop bloop, and your quarter is gone. I hated that. Oh, it was rude. And did you ever play the one with the pump shotgun? Which made it.
Oh, yeah, like in the actual arcade.
Yeah, it was like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I literally worked at a call center where the day I started, they had Carnival and they wheeled it out the next day. So it was because I think some employees were complaining about that, which I guess is understandable, but I was still I still wanted to play that because they had that in the break room. I was thinking, "Oh, that's amazing." And they had the shotgun,
Oh
the
god.
plastic pump shotgun on that.
Yeah, it's fun in concept until you realize how fast you have to shoot in that game and pumping between shots.
Well, I mean, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I point out like the main villain is Baron von Token Taker. I
Yeah.
mean, they're not hiding what it is.
Nope.
So
Nope. It's great. It's great. At least they're honest. Okay,
yeah,
so you did these the Freeman's Mind videos. You did this video game thing. So I mean it's pretty
yeah.
apparent. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I mostly just kind of want to do fun. I mean, some are game videos are fun. Some just fun, sort of surreal comedy videos is kind of what I want to work back towards more. But this is just a side topic that's just been bugging me to no end in the games industry because man, people complain about all sorts of things in the games industry, and a lot of it seems like, yeah, well, that sucks, but you know, look, I support people's right to make a bad game. If they want
Right.
to put in junk I don't like, well, I'll decide how much I don't like it or move to another game. But this just feels fundamentally different to me, where it, I think it overlaps a couple different circles. Like if you really care about consumer law or consumer rights, this is an issue. From my perspective, it's just kind of a shock value seeing something that has so much work and resources behind it destroyed, and no one's ever going to play that again, even though they paid for that. It's just, I don't know. I've never been able to wrap my brain around it, and I'm seeing this trend accelerate. So this is kind of my all-in effort to see if I can do anything to reverse course on this or change the stop it. I mean, again, I'm staying completely like single issue on it. I mean, it's like, well, oh, made a bad game. Okay, fine. Well, can you still play it in some fashion? Okay, well then there's no problem from my end. So it's
Yeah, and I mean that's ultimately the issue because yeah, I see this is slightly different, but we see this in Nintendo, right? Where I'm 37. I grew up with a Nintendo and these classic games from the late 80s and early 90s, and I love playing them, but I have to have an old Nintendo to do it, which is fine. They're out there, people maintain them and all that stuff. But in a similar way, that Nintendo keeps releasing these consoles, and ever since the Wii, they've promised this store that would allow you to buy the entire back catalog, and they never ever deliver on it. And it's one of the most frustrating things because it's like eventually those cartridges are going to not be there.
yeah.
Eventually it's going to be harder and harder to find a system, which is a problem, but they still have this glorious piece of property that someone wants to play, and they keep teasing out that you'll have access to it, and they never quite pull it off. Which I get that, and that's not the issue you're necessarily talking
Yeah, I
about
mean, to
here.
me, that's like one rung down from where I'm aiming because
Right.
if you're just a fanatic, you can find that Nintendo game or some system that you want. Or, I mean, that's something you want to hear as a lawyer. But I would say I tend to care more about the practical aspect of it because let's say you had that game and then you can't find it anywhere. But you know what? Emulators exist. You might go and try and find a ROM somewhere. Yes, it's not legal, but
Well, I can't
I
endorse
I
it,
I
but I
tend to take a
certainly
flexibility and kind
yeah.
of victimless crimes. If they're not even I mean, if they're selling it, that's one thing because then you're taking money, well, or it's money that would be going to the creator or the rights holder. But if it's like, if nobody is even selling it, or I play a lot of abandonware, which
Right.
isn't a real legal term, but it's the concept. The company might be dead, or and there's just these copies floating around out there that,
Sometimes the
yeah,
company
technically there's no you know there's no legal premise to play it or have the rights to it. But again, if the company's dead, no one even knows who has the rights, or if anyone, it's like there's no harm in it. I see in that sort of thing, but
and some of these companies that own the rights are literally like a guy who's homeless or a guy who works at a Denny's somewhere
or
now.
sometimes it's an insurance company that has nothing to do with video games that ended up from multiple buyout contracts from 20 years ago. So
Right, right.
yeah,
I think there's a very popular property from the 90s that was owned by ostensibly by a software company. That software company was like three guys who started their company out of their basement or whatever in college. And then that's how 90s games didn't take uh they didn't have these AAA studios producing games that with a budget of $20 million. They were just guys coding in a basement or whatever. And so you have some of these properties where the ownership is between one of a couple people, and they may not even be doing software anymore, but they just happen to own the rights to this particular thing through how the company's software contracts and buyouts all worked out. And so they're really hard to lock down. But again, this is where what the only reason I brought up the Nintendo stuff and this sort of rights issue of these old games is the point that even though these Nintendo games are 30 years old, and this is something you said in the
yeah,
video, people still speed run Mario Brothers 1. Like, and not just a few people. This has a big audience. We have AGDQ and SDGQ doing these, having people playing these properties that are decades old uh, over and over and over to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of viewers. And people are still doing this, right? They're still engaging in these properties, and we're we're talking about these games that are before we ran into stuff like this game as a service concept. But as we move through, we're going to lose that if every game dies at the whim of its creator.
yeah,
We're going to lose this secondary or tertiary market of these older properties that people use and people really enjoy, and that's I think a real problem or a real crime.
yeah. I mean, it's for me. I inserted it in the video as a half joke. I mean, it was meant to kind of make a joke out of, but I honestly get that kind of feeling when I see just a game that's just shut down that, people bought, and like it's obvious, even if I don't particularly care for it, if it's obvious to me how much work went into it, it is kind of like seeing a book burning. Like it's like, yeah, let's just burn books. Why not? Like, I mean, it's less likely to contain as much maybe um I guess cultural value as your average book, but it can be there. I mean, it's
I don't know.
and
I think we're transitioning to a point where video games are mainstream storytelling devices. Not all of them, obviously. Hashtag not all games or whatever. But we do have these rather epic stories that people latch onto. I mean, Halo. Uh, People around my age who grew up or had their late teenage years influenced by the Halo story, you can find people who really get into the lore of Halo, and it has become, this thing. It's spawned books. It's spawned a whole universe of lore, and Halo's not alone in that. You've got Mass Effect, you've got the Elder Scrolls games, where these worlds and universes have been created that do tell grand and epic storylines. They're doing it in a different way. And I think we're transitioning towards seeing that. And as video games become bigger and bigger business, I think that's going to be a bigger and bigger facet of them. But that's me personally. So
yeah, well, I mean, if you enjoy games, you play them long enough, you're gonna find something that really stands out to you one way or another. I mean, I think that's the concept everybody can get behind. They can think of their favorite game, and yeah, they probably will want to revisit it at some point. Yeah, and just or go back and maybe see other things that they missed, or things like that. I mean, yeah, you talk about the people playing the game for 30 years or more. Well, the games are unique, that they can have their own style. And again, well, I've mentioned in the video, it's a creative work. There's not pretty much any game, there's not a direct substitute for it. If, you decide that, well, you like that one. Okay, well, you can't, I'm stammering a bit, but I mentioned in the video, if your toaster dies, you can get another toaster and your toast can be just as good. A game, it doesn't work like that. It's more like
Right.
books or film or a piece of art or something like
Yeah, because
along those lines.
I still play Battletoads on the original Nintendo, and there's no other Battletoads. There's nothing like it.
Exactly.
You'll never get it again. They try, and it sucks when they try.
Well, you might get an indie studio get something quite in the same spirit as Battletoads, but still not Battletoads.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, that happens a lot.
So, so yeah, I think, there's value and there's merit to this. You make the great case that these things are art and preserving art is something important. And I think that's bolstered in, not directly, but in something Lior says when he talks about the copyright issue that Congress has for the power of, or for the purpose of preserving art and science, the power to grant a limited right or limited exclusive ownership through either copyrights or the patent system for artists and scientists, respectively, and that's conceptually useful. But let's get into how you define games as a service in the first place. So if you want to lay that out.
Yeah, I did that. People may disagree with this definition, and that's fine. I did that because this was my interpretation of the issue, and even if you disagree, you're still on the same page with where I am on this. Right. I define games as a service as a business practice that we're basically the control of whether you can play the game or not. It's being withheld from you by the company, because there's all sorts of things with games as a service. People are thinking like microtransactions, updates, and a whole lot of games as a service. Well, the vast majority have those things, but then you'll have these exceptions that don't. And to me, that's what stands out more than anything else. Because if a game, like let's say there's a game I'm interested in, has a ton of DLC or updates, well, maybe that interests me, maybe it doesn't. But if I know that the control of whether I can run this game is just not in my hands, and it's never going to be in my hands, I can't turn that off in my brain, because I know at some point they're going to shut that down, and then I can never play that game again. And that's just always rubbed me in such a wrong way. I mean, so that's how I define it, because I found exceptions to pretty much every other thing that was associated with it, but I couldn't really find it for games as a service. So by the functionality being withheld, that usually means you have to connect to some sort of central server to run the game. And it's always going to be like that. Because actually, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, memory's blurry on this, but I think for Star Siege Tribes, I think they did have a central server you could connect to that, made it more streamlined. Or I think for sure, like the Unreal Tournament series had stuff like that, like
Tribes
2004.
Tribes had, I think they had proprietary servers, but I think they also had custom servers that people could host.
Exactly. So that's the point. A central server can add all sorts of conveniences or enhancements or even additional features that might not be possible without that. But it's not really required to run we can get into this more. It's not really required to run the game in any fashion. It's, maybe I'm using the wrong words here. Yeah, our time zones are a bit different. I woke up about.
No, you're fine. One of the things that's important, because people get hung up on games as a service being used by the industry and being used by people in a different way, and you're piggybacking on the prevalence of that term, but you're trying to define it narrowly into this one section that is incorrect. And I think you really nailed it in the video, because you laid out, okay, a subscription game is technically kind of a game as a service, an EverQuest, a World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that when you're purchasing EverQuest and it says subscription required to play this game, that you are submitting yourself to the mercy of a third party. Like, go ahead.
Let's go ahead. Yeah, we may have interruptions because of the time gap, but
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, one thing I wanted to clarify when I said games as a service is fraud, I actually wasn't I realized I didn't make this clear in the video. I actually wasn't referring to the consumer about that. I was actually, again, maybe this argument has weight or not, but I was actually referring to fraud against the government because I felt like, well, the argument as I understood it was that you have two different types of software licenses, perpetual or subscription. And again, with stuff like EverQuest or World of Warcraft, those are obviously subscription licenses where you have to pay every 30 days or that's it. You lose access to your service. Whereas games as a service, they just usually the end user license agreement, these are sold as goods. And they say that, well, the support or connection to the server could end at any time. I guess they're basically selling them functionally as services, but under the law, they're being sold as goods. And that's where I was pretty much almost all of my legal portion of the argument kind of hinges on that distinction. That's the reason I was focusing on it because, look, even for the ones they sell as goods, they say, yeah, we can shut this down anytime for any or no reason. So my assumption, which may or may not be right, was that if you were to do this in other industries, this might not be legal. I mean, like, but again, it could be a sort of weird technicality thing where it may not matter too. Because again, you have to get to really weird analogies to come up with this stuff because this almost doesn't exist in the real world. Because I was thinking, say you sell shoes, like that's what you report to the government, you do your taxes and your business license. When the reality is you're selling boxes, and when they open it up, there's a ticket that says you are entitled to a shoe rental for indefinite or undefined period of time. So people do get shoes, but that's a service that you're selling then if it's a rental.
Right.
And they're not, but you're reporting that you're selling it as a good. So I was arguing I still think they're doing wrong by the consumer, but I was arguing the actual fraud portion, what they're actually doing is different than I think how it's being defined legally to the government or whatever the governing body is for what
Right.
it is.
And I'm not certain how that would how that impacts I mean, we're talking deep law and probably unexplored sort of territory on how that really impacts the relationship between the game producer and the government. Because games are taxed as goods, right? Like you go to buy something and you pay a sales tax on it. And in many states, you don't pay a sales tax on a bunch of services. Now, some states are changing that, but there is a distinction between a good and a service that you purchase. Whether or not states are taxing them the same or differently, there is a distinction. It used to be in Minnesota, anyway, where I'm from, that if you went and you got like a massage, for example, that was a service. There's no tax on that massage. I think that's changed recently, but they're still legally distinct things. Whereas if I go and buy a massage oil or like an auto massage vibrating thing, that's a good. And so I'm definitely going to pay a sales tax on it. There's a difference in how they're categorized. Now, as far as the game industry and how they're doing this, I'm not sure they're not gaining some advantage by pretending that they're good and selling them as a service as far as the government goes. They're not gaining like a tax break or something that I'm aware of. However, the purpose is not what advantage they're getting for all of this. The purpose is that they are legally distinct things, and we can have two legally distinct things within an industry. That's an important point that I think is getting overlooked by people who are critical of your video. It's not that well, it doesn't matter if this is this or if this is this. Okay, but we have two different products That's what we're really talking about here. We have a game that you go and you buy a physical copy that you can play forever, so long as you maintain the two pieces of hardware that you have, the
Yeah.
physical game thing and the system that you plug it into. That's that's one product. And then we have this other product where, what, be it on a physical thing or not, and no matter what you do to maintain the property that you own that's required to run the game, there's some third party involved that has to maintain property. Those are two distinctly different things, but they're,
Yeah.
like you're saying, they're not held out as such. They're held out as just, this is a video game, and any consumer going in has no idea that what they're purchasing may go away tomorrow. And
I think, well, I would argue, I would argue that actually, I would agree on some of the legal analysis I had on this point, that I think it would be a difficult case to make to argue that most buyers of this have no idea that could go away just because the practice has been around that long. And for legal, legal document, even if it's not a legal document, they are saying that in the end user license agreements that, yeah, this could shut down at any time. I mean, you could argue there's a little bit of deception there, but, well, I mean, there is certainly is a precedent for having the one that you own, but I feel like that's probably a dead end because let's say a court found that, okay, yeah, this is a problem. Fine, they just put on the cover like, this this requires a internet subscription or whatever. Well, I think they say things like that now, but like this requires maintenance from our servers to run or something that it does say the message but doesn't, but keeps it toned down enough to
sure.
do it.
Yeah, yeah, I think what you're getting at is that people are sophisticated enough, or at least have been beat over the head enough to know that this is a possibility. Or they could be made to know with some sort of labeling, and that'd be great. Every video game box suddenly looks like a pack of cigarettes with 10,000 warnings on them, and we're all happy now. That's not
Yeah,
the
well,
solution that we want, obviously.
yeah, well, the angle I was seeing was, okay, let's say this distinction between goods and services matter. Well, if the games honestly have, I think the companies doing this don't really want to define these as services for two main reasons I can think of. Like, okay, let's, like, one of those, okay, let's say a game like Division or Destiny or something where you buy it, you can play it, but at some point they can shut that down at whenever and you can't, really unplayable. Well, the first reason is they would have to say, like, okay, well, this period will support it for 2 years or something. Well, they actually have to define that. Well, even though it hasn't changed in their game plan for how they plan to support the game, customers can now see that, oh wow, this game only lasts for 2 years. Well, geez, I don't know if I want to buy this one now. It's completely a psychological thing, even though the practice could be exactly the same. But I think that could potentially hurt sales. Like if you know that this game is only supported for 2 years, or this game, you won't be able, you could potentially not be able to run this game after 3 years or 4 years. Whereas, you know, again, you mentioned something like Battletoads or something like that. Yeah, there's no, as long as you can keep the game and the parts running, you're good. It seems as a more permanent thing. So that's one. I think it could hurt sales from a psychological perspective. And the other is, say the game's a complete flop. They don't want to support this for 2 years. Let's say it just dies after 6 months. It's just nobody playing it. So that puts them into a higher level of obligation and cost by defining it as a service. And that was the main advantage I was seeing, is by defining these as goods and not services. There's a little bit of a psychological sales edge, and plus there's a less liability or responsibility they have to take to if they do come out and define them as services. I mean, again, that doesn't necessarily get to the main issue that I made the video for, but it could be a strong enough angle to kind of change things dramatic, like kind of reduce this practice.
Right. Do you remember, now this, I don't know how many people remember this, but do you remember Divix DVDs? Not DivX, the
The
codec.
capital letter Divix is,
Right. Do you remember, cuz this was this was a similar thing.
yeah, I'm fuzzy on that. If you can Give us a
Okay,
refresher, man.
I happened to work at Circuit City, who was partners with whoever was producing these Divix DVDs and stuff like that. Um, Basically, the long and short of how they worked was you went in, you bought a physical copy of a DVD for like $5 or $6, as opposed to the 20 that they were retailing for at the time. And you could, once you put your Divix player had to be plugged into your phone line because we weren't at broadband yet, but once you put the disc into your player and hit play, you had 48 hours to watch it as many times as you want. And then when you were done, you had a disc, and that disc was useless. You could, or one option that you had was you could buy a permanent license to Divix or to the movie, and then you could watch it forever, just like a regular DVD. Although that wasn't entirely true. That's how it was sold. That's how we were told to sell it. That's how everybody understood it, because you've got your disc, and once you pay, well, I paid my $20, now I get my movie forever. But it was actually in a what was it, a 24-month license that you got for it, and after 2 years, yeah, it was terrible. Now, of course, Divix itself, before that 2 years even came up, was kaput because it was garbage, and the opposition was overwhelming. They hated it.
It's almost the same business model. I mean, it's extremely similar.
It's it's very similar. And I just thought of this now while we were on stream, because I'm trying to find out. I'm like, there has to be somewhere where we've said this isn't an okay thing to do. And Divix is one. I've got the Wikipedia article pulled up, but some stuff it says allegations of anti-competitive vaporware, as well as concerns within the software industry, prompted David Dranove of Northwestern University and Neil Gandal of Tel Aviv University and University of California, Berkeley, to conduct an empirical study designed to measure the effects of the Divix announcement on the DVD market. Suggested Divix announcement slowed the adoption of DVD technology. And then the study suggests that the general antitrust concern about vaporware seems justified. So that's kind of interesting, because part of what you're talking about is the idea of this vaporware or abandonware, where they're selling you licenses to something. Because this is one place where I disagree with Lior. I mean, they're selling you a license, but the problem is not that they can end the contract at any time. When one party can unilaterally end a contract without notice at any time, including up to the day after you purchase it, that's not a contract, in my opinion. That's an illusory promise, which would void any other contract. If you're like, if you go into business and say, well, we're going to promise to buy all of this stuff as long as you undertake these burdens like paying us and setting up for distribution, all that, but we can cancel it at any time with no notice to you ever, and just shut it down. Not even like a phone call to say, oh, by the way, we're shutting down our contract or any sort of thing. We can just shut it down. Those contracts have real trouble being upheld, because where's the promise if one party has all the power and can shut it down immediately? And this is where I think some of the critics of you are failing on the contract part, is that Lior focused on unconscionability, which is one thing. An unconscionable term in a contract is ignored and could potentially void an entire contract. But if there's an illusory promise in a contract, then you don't have an agreement at all. And I think that's the reality of what we're getting here, because you mentioned some game where people bought it, and within, I can't remember what game it was.
A week and a half. Yeah, the culling too. Now they made good. They refunded everybody.
Yeah. But I mean, they did. But okay, so that was a week and a half. Well, what if it was 4 weeks? Then do they refund everybody? Well, what about 2 months? Where's the line?
This is what came up in some of the other chats I had with attorneys, where it seemed like almost everybody, even people who were just completely arguing against me from a legal perspective, they were agreeing that if, let's say, you put out a game and you shut it, you can play it, and like you say, 4 weeks, or let's say a week or something. If they shut it down after that, they were saying that would be fraud. However, let's go to like 6 months or a year, do the exact same thing, and then it's not considered fraud because you technically still own the game client, even though that's almost worthless without the server connection. It's like they're using a different standard under the law to decide for what we're measuring. It's like if the game client is truly all that mattered, then why would shutting it down after a week or two be considered fraud? You still have your game client. Even
Right.
again, even though I'm just arguing from a conceptual perspective. Obviously, the game has. I think that I don't think anyone can argue that the game has real value, and this is why people are buying it for just the game client. They're buying an expectation of a working game.
Right.
I think that's
Well, and these time measurements are arbitrary. I mean, sure, the culling or whatever had a week and a half window, but let's say it's 6 months, and you bought it 5.5 months in to that 6 month
yeah,
sale
yeah.
period.
Oh, that's happened to me, something like that. I haven't bought I've tried to avoid these games, but I bought a copy of H1Z1 Just Survive while it was in early access. They shut that sucker down in early access. Now, I understand early access means, yeah, you may not get a finished game. They took it I figured buying it early access means it still has some life to it, once it goes final. I was prepared for them to not finish the game. But, I think that's one of the few cases I've seen where it's like not only do they not finish the game, no, they shut it down. So it was dead before it never left early access, and it was dead. Now it's completely unplayable.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
I guess yeah, go ahead. I lost my train of thought.
no, I think you're right. I've been derelict in my duties. One thing I do on the show
Oh, okay.
is when there's a $20 super chat, I try and read it right away so that people can actually ask questions
Sure.
to me and to the guest while they're awake.
Sure.
So I'm gonna hit through those real quick because they might have some questions for us. So Siesta Jan Juigo says, "Sorry, Rackets. I work 13 hours a day and need sleep. I'll catch the video on demand. Could you and Ross maybe discuss how this would all apply to temporarily available modes/events in games? It's annoying when limited modes are good." Um,
Yeah.
that's a tough one for me because I don't know. Even if we could snap our fingers like Thanos and make everything work the way we wanted to with games as a service being completely obliterated and you always being able to have access to your product even when the company stops, I don't know that there would be anything to say that you have a right to access everything that has ever happened in a game. Like that's an impossibility, I would think, especially when multiplayer is concerned and stuff like that. But maybe I'm misreading the question because I'm thinking like special events that would happen in EverQuest
Yeah,
when I
yeah, I
would
know.
play it.
Well, let's say like a Halloween mode for an MMO or something,
Right.
But like it's there for a couple weeks and then it's gone. Or honestly, I just took the easy way out and didn't even try to address that because it's like I I I I feel like that's like you said, that's tougher, and I'd like to have some access to that, but it's like, man, I just had to I'm
Yeah.
playing triage with this. It's like if the game is playable in some form, I want to win that battle first before focusing on like a farther one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That just seems like separate. That gets really tough. That was like similar to what you were saying with the multiple versions thing. Is like are we gonna take this to the extreme and demand that every single version that they made have some working preserved copy and you could version skip at any time? I think that might be unreasonable
my
to
standards have been
do.
lowered too much to fight that battle.
Yeah.
Like, like
Okay.
I need to know the game itself is gonna survive before I can
Right.
move to that level. It's
It's baby
like
steps
that's like
here.
two or three rungs down from where I am.
Yeah. Okay, so Moist John says later and gayer than Freeman to work. Thanks for that. Then we've got Jifsef says was not be able to make it to yesterday's stream. 2009 June 25th was my 9th birthday, and I was visiting one of my cousins in the hospital due to a car accident, and on the TV, the news of Michael Jackson's death. So it wasn't a good ninth birthday for me. Oh, I'm sorry. Last night I
Bummer.
talked with Razor Fist about Michael Jackson. So that's where that was coming from. Seymour Butts says, just got off work from a 16-hour day. I was so glad your show is on, and with a cool guest, now I can relax and enjoy. Good, thank you. The Pie Baker says, I miss when games were complete at launch, when the developers took their time, did not rush, and released a completed product with zero game-breaking bugs like E.T. on the Atari 2600.
Well, hey, I'll give you some words of consolation on that. The one thing I will say about early access games, when they leave early access, you know what? They're probably good to go because that's one positive thing I could say about them because, because I consider those, they're probably really are just kind of old school 1.0. We have one shot at this to,
Yeah.
do the game right. And I figured that's probably the closest you'll get to that now.
Yeah. One second.
Okay, sure.
What's up, lady? Okay. Did you tell mom? Okay, go tell mom. Oh, sorry. My kids have a habit of just like not going to bed.
We mentioned before the chat. I remember there was this one politician talking, and in the middle of it, his 3-year-old whatever just comes like strutting in like this, and then another baby comes in like looking confused in this roller toddler.
And isn't that where the nurse or the childcare person like comes flying in to try?
Yeah, I think so. It made the politician look bad too, not because that happened. I think everybody thought that was funny. It's because he's like putting his hand on their face and trying to like push them and pretend they don't exist. Like,
Yeah, that was a funny one. No, my daughter just comes in with an ice pack on her face, and she said her sister was mean because she threw a little empty plastic like toy ketchup bottle at her. How much damage could this do? Your sister's 3. Anyway, so yeah, sorry about that. We've got oh yeah, about the completed games thing. I both agree and disagree. I mean, I do think it's really important to have games completed at launch, and just for the reputation of the company. But I'm less concerned about the idea of having a complete game because sometimes, like Diablo 2 at launch, or not Diablo 2, Diablo 3 at launch was a much different game than Diablo 3 has become. And somewhere between that launch and now, they hit a sweet spot where the game was much, much better than it was at release. And so if these companies just had to determine, because we could never update games like when we had, when you had a physical cartridge or just one CD and no hard drive or access to over the air updates, you might just have that one shot. Well, we don't have that anymore, and we can improve games. But I do think they should function when you install them. You buy them, install them, or whatever, and play them at the gate.
Yeah, again, that particular topic, I'm probably not your guy for that because that's just, man, I don't know where to start with that one. That one's too hard. But like when we mentioned the shutdown earlier, I was saying there's also a big difference between a company just ending support, saying, okay, well, you know what, if you have incompatibility with the latest video card or your memory goes bad, well, that's not our problem. I'm totally fine with that, but there's a real hard distinction because with most games in the past, if support ends and let's say there's a new version of Windows or the disk gets scratched or something, you know what? You may not be able to run your game anymore, but plenty of other people still can run the game or find ways to run the game. I'm talking scenarios where no one can run the game. Every single person who bought it cannot run it at all. It is dead. I mean, or bricked game, and I think that's a big distinction between just sort of natural accidents, wear and tear, incompatibilities that might arise versus no, it goes beyond that. Actually, I think you might agree with this point because not only do they set it up that way so that everyone who ever bought it can never run it again. But they go further with countermeasures with the DRM that they leave on initially to prevent piracy or hacking and stuff, and they just leave that there, meaning it's completely encrypted. Your odds are already bad with getting this game running, and that makes it almost miraculous level. In fact, in the video, I compared it to Enigma trying to crack the code the
Right.
Germans were using in World War II. I had a few people come out and say, "No, Ross, that was easier
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
than the DRM now. Like that was a single like consistent vulnerability or
We're
something."
talking about like 260 or 256-bit encryption or whatever now, and
Yeah.
it's like what are people? There's one of the things that you brought up is the number of people who could do this is infinitesimally small, and
Oh
even for
yeah.
them, the amount of resources that it would take would make it almost impossible
Oh,
to get them to do it.
it's not reasonable by any standard. Like no standard at all. I
Right.
mean, it's
Okay, Mythos Irving says, Nick, I heard you love Daggerfall. I do. You should check out Daggerfall Unity. It's like 95% done. It's not buggy and has mod support. Well, I don't really want mods. I just want my Daggerfall. I'll check it out. That would be great.
yeah. I saw a video of that. One thing that impressed me is I think it had like major draw distance, so you could really see the town from a distance. I thought that looked neat.
Did you play Daggerfall? Man, that game is
No,
good.
I didn't. I definitely know of it, but that's one I missed
I
generally.
spent so many flipping years just sitting there playing that stupid game.
That's still in like the top 10 or maybe 5 for like largest just physically large
Oh, it's
virtual
ridiculous.
space.
I
Like
mean, yeah, considering like all of the Skyrim, Morrowind, or whatever, they're all provinces in the game of Daggerfall.
oh yeah, but the way it generated, it's like the size of a continent in real. If you were to actually have this physical space or something,
Yeah, yeah,
like
it's huge. Um, okay, Seymour Butt says I like the messages that give massages that give me happy tax break ending. Those are good. Yeah. Shadow Kane says MMO City of Heroes NCSoft viciously shut us down 8 years ago. Recently, the code is leaked. We have the game running on many private servers. NCSoft has yet to speak on this still. Thoughts? Join us, chat. We need your support. Um, to me, the best thing NCSoft could do is come out and like I don't know, like just give them their blessing. Ask them to support their next project. This is something that I see some weird stuff with, and it's a legally weird place for me because you want NCSoft to have created something and make the money from it, but if they stop supporting it, like at what point is it abandoned? And again, this is one of my problems with Lior's argument is that he talked about the difference between patent and copyright. He's like, well, a patent, is this massive expenditure by like a pharmaceutical company to
yeah.
bring a drug to market, sometimes in the billions of dollars. And I think the average today is 500 to 700 million dollars at a minimum to bring a drug to market. So, and they've determined that 20 years is a sufficient amount of time. So then he says, what we should do is bring copyright in line 20 years and then maybe give them up to 30 or whatever
Yeah,
for
if they submit all their stuff so it can be preserved.
but 30
I
years is it's an enormous amount of time. And that's not in my opinion that doesn't address your concern at all because
It
let's
would help a
say
little. It would help a little. Let's say 5-10%. I think it might help, like something
yeah,
like that.
I mean it'd be a step for sure, but we're talking about 30 years ago.
How many game companies from 30 years ago are still out and have preserved all their work? And
Right, 1989. You're talking still early NES games. I think Battletoads, which I mentioned, is 91. So we're talking 1989. You've got early NES titles
you
just
have
now hitting
Commodore
this.
64 stuff. You talk about a jungle of things out there. I mean, it's that was. I mean, see, even Nintendo had standards and companies. Anybody with a computer back then could make a Commodore 64. That was a real Wild West of
Well,
stuff
like
back then.
Custer's Last Stand is very Wild West, for example. Uh, but yeah, they've got I think that 30-year window is unrealistic in what we're talking about. And I think it fails. I mean, it brings up the ability of people to resurrect a game. And so that's nice. That's nice that it gives us the ability to resurrect something from 3 decades ago. But it doesn't defeat the underlying problem that if today I buy a game and in, let's give it a reasonable amount of time, 6 months, they shut down the game that I bought, then what? I can't play it for 30 years? Like, how does that how does
I mean,
that jive for
that does
me?
nothing for like from a consumer rights standpoint. Actually, see, I mean, that's the thing. There's multiple angles on this that if to look at it from a long-term preservation that would help some for those companies that decide. See, that's the other thing for these companies that decide they actually want to get their game running for over 20 years. I'd argue the majority don't. They're going to want to keep their intellectual property to a game, but usually if the game's being shut down by a major company, that means it's run its course for their profitability. I mean, they may have a sequel lined up and they think they can make a lot of money on that. That's fine, but you know, the fact that they're shutting it down, I'd say unless there's financial issues with a smaller company, because there've been a few cases where they come back up, like APB and APB Reloaded was one. I think Hellgate London had. I'm still confused what happened with that one for the multiplayer portion, but there are a few cases where they just ran out of money, but then they worked hard to bring it back, and then it did come back, like after a year or something.
Mhm.
Like I'm not trying to block out cases like that, but if it's oh, this famous sweet tea. Okay.
Oh,
The
I was a guy in the chat.
it almost looked like a product placement here, the
Well,
way you had it. So,
Necrodermis in the chat, Necrodamus says, no Milo sweet tea tonight. So I was pretending to show him, but I realized I wasn't showing him. I was showing you. So,
okay.
but no, we got it. Yeah. But yeah, I think if we focus on this from a copyright angle, that we overlook something. No one is looking. I mean, when people look at this problem, they aren't looking to recreate or to take the IP or to utilize the IP in some way to the detriment of the company. No one's saying that when they shut down their game, like let's say they make a game called Nick's Game or whatever, and I shut it down after 6 months or a year or 2 years, that I want that other people are wanting to come in and make Nick's Game too and take my IP. That's not what we're
no, that's a separate issue entirely. I mean,
right. Right. The focus on this, and this is my main contention with Leor, is that he's not addressing the problem at hand, and the problem at hand is that a user who purchases the game wants to be able to continue using the game. The user who bought it is the aggrieved party.
an instanced copy of the game. They don't own the rights, they don't own the code, but they do own their copy that they had, were sold on the pretext of being able to play it in some
Right.
way.
Right.
A
And
reasonable chance of doing so.
exactly. Exactly. That's the
And
part that
if 0% of all your customer base cannot play it, and there's nothing they can reasonably do to change that, that's not a reasonable chance of being able to play the game.
right.
And it seemed like the law was even they were arguing the other attorneys were arguing that it's like there's a different standard after 6 months of what we're measuring. Are we measuring just ownership of the game client, or are we measuring just a reasonable chance to play the game? It's
Yeah, and
and oh, sorry.
oh, go
Okay.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Was one thing I wanted to jump in when they mentioned was it the NC stuff? Was it the City of Heroes?
Yeah.
That kind of that's another point I kind of want to touch on when I talk about this being artificial. It's a little nuanced because I was kind of hyper focused on this being goods because I thought in the video because that was the legal argument. I thought that might have some traction, but really there is a service element of it. Like say you have admins, moderators, people making updates to the game, like coming up with new content. That all that stuff is a service. You need real people in order to keep that going. But the game itself is code that, yes, they've set it up so that the server itself is a service, but really if anyone or just just a few people had access to that code, they can run that game in some form. Maybe the game it was an MMO, it could support thousands of players, and well, you know what, we can only support like 200 or something. So yeah, it won't. The service does enhance the game, but as whether you can just run it or not, that aspect really is a good, and all you need is the code. You don't need the ongoing actions of the people performing the service to get to it. So I thought that was so when I talk about it being artificial, that's what I mean. Some aspects are not artificial. Like if you want 10,000 players and that all connects to the same place and like a moderated auction house or something like that, yeah, you do need the service for that part. But if you need to just enter in the game and have some other people connect and go do quests or something, that really is just you just need the code, which is the good.
Well,
I mean,
there
it's been
was
set up as a service, but it's
yeah, well, to give the I'm gonna, I know you're excluding largely MMOs from your argument, and there's your reasons,
just from the legal standpoint. Just from the legal standpoint,
right, and the reasons for it are very good because you obviously need to get the full experience of the MMO. You need that ability for all of these people to come together, and there's a different expectation anytime you're shelling out money every month. So
right?
it kind of makes it a little bit distinct. And again, it's not like we have a limited amount of legal distinctions that are, it's like, oh, we're out of those. we're all out of being able to separate products out. So there can be MMO games as a service that are distinct from non-MMO games as a service, or we can have subscription-based games versus single payment games. And those can be different categories that are treated differently. That's okay. But it's instructive, I think, to bring this up from my personal experience when I was playing EverQuest a lot in the early 2000s. There was someone out there who had created basically a virtual EverQuest server, and you could go in and you can play single player EverQuest on this server. And now because you have access to the server itself, which is doing all of the NPC generation and all of that stuff, because you had access to all of to that server, you could actually make yourself more powerful or whatever, because you couldn't tackle all of the content as a normal character. And using that, I think, was a violation of the EULA, but largely because, in my opinion, and I don't know the exact reasons, but I'm going to speculate that it was because it gave people an unfair sort of competitive advantage to go in on a private server and try out different mechanics and stuff like that. In a sense, it's like a map hack or something like that we would see in games like Diablo 2. It gave you an unfair leg up. However, once EverQuest eventually dies, what's the harm in having that virtual server? And even, I guess, once whoever owns it now, Daybreak Studios, decides to stop servicing it, what would be the harm in someone running a private EverQuest server? Like, why are we averse to this? And why are we protecting the interest of companies over the interest of consumers on this measure? This is the weird thing is I know so many people are out there dying on this hill that it's an impossible fight, or it's not the right thing, but at the same, so what? Why is this where we draw the line? That's one thing I'm failing to understand with all this, is why are we so happy to give these companies the ability to shut this stuff down and apologize for it?
Yeah, well, I have heard counter arguments. In my opinion, well, see, like I mentioned in the video, I try to look at the pros and cons, and the arguments against it are so. Yeah, again, I'm not trying to. I'm being as kind of pro business as I can on this. You know what? If you're serving the game like you bought it, like with EverQuest, I'd actually wouldn't like try to fight up and down the people for the right for the people to run the emulator while the game is running and they're providing the service. I mean, maybe there is a legal argument there, but for me, again, I'm just really trying to keep it black and white. But once you shut down the game, you are no longer selling it. You've decided as a company, and you're not. It's not a temporary thing saying, "Oh, guys, we're going to try and get it back up. We just need more funding or something." Like you're retiring it pretty much. then the people who paid for it, that's where I'm saying it enters in. I think I even said in the video, it's not fraud until they, shut it down, and then you've lost your product essentially. But yeah, as for what to play devil's advocate, the reasons why that I've heard, one, I think this is extremely minor. I'm not sure there's even a case of this. One that was told to me by Hogue Law was that they might be worried about I, I well, two things. One could be legal liability, but I'm not sure I'm buying that. I think they could release that on like they clearly define the terms of how you're allowed to use, like let's say this client or source code or just notes, just document notes. Yeah, I mentioned in the video a minimum effort option, which would still take a ton of work to do, but it wouldn't make it just the near impossible task. So they might be worried about legality on that, but I'm not sure I buy that part. But one thing that they're worried about is, oh, let's say this is a PR liability where they're saying that, okay, like the example he made was, let's say somebody makes a server, but then they put all sorts of like white supremacy symbols on it, and then that gets them bad press. I was thinking, the odds of that are so small. I mean,
You
like
just you just rule
I even
34'd it.
yeah, I asked him, yeah, exactly. I mean, I asked him, is there ever been a case of that where the company provided server software and not only did the people make a server like that, but that's what got the overwhelming attention of the, I mean, I'm sure there's been all kinds of just wacky custom servers that people do whatever they want and nobody cares because they understand, well, it's a private server. People are going to do whatever they want with it. But to the point where that actually hurts the company, to me, that's not a good enough excuse to destroy the game forever and leave the people who paid to play that game no recourse whatsoever. Now, I think the majority reason this happens is that, management makes I mentioned in the video, no effort is going to win over some effort because even to do just the absolute bare minimum, that does take some effort. Uh, and actually, point to clear up that some people came down on me on was that, or I mentioned that the minimum effort solution would be anywhere from under an hour to a few days based on consulting. I'm not talking about a working game from that. I'm talking about you have a chance now. Like a really technically minded person has a chance to restore that game where there's less than 0.01% chance without that. So
Yeah, and I'm not entirely convinced that it's that much work. Even so, because they have a running server, like they have a running server piece of software. So if they
oh,
release it, presumably, like we're long past the days of proprietary hardware in gaming. So it's not like they release this. It's like, okay, what is this running on a Linux box, a Windows box, or a Mac box? It's not like the company has created their own private software that only runs on this specific limited hardware set. This runs on something that someone can buy. So I
okay, I'll give a few. Hey, we'll lay it out. I'll give a few more reasons that they don't, because there can be a few legit reasons. Well, one, you said it could run any software. Some of these MMOs, especially, they really do have just custom hardware that just it's not even x86. It's meant for something completely separate. But um, one argument that is valid that, let's say they release the source code or to the server. Well, there might be a couple problems with that, even from a legal perspective. One, they might be using middleware where they need like this kind of another company's has their own code and their own license that kind of facilitates how the game works,
right.
and they may not have the rights to release that. Okay, that's a valid argument. And then another one is that, oh, well, you know what? We're shutting down this game, but our other MMO uses a lot of the same code. And if you get to see everything and how this game works with the source code, that could make a hacking nightmare for our other game. Okay. But see, that's why so that's the thing. We're doing nothing. We are doing absolutely nothing, or almost worse than nothing with the encryption. when I mentioned that minimum effort option, that would not expose them to either of those risks. It doesn't give out code. They can still do it without, threatening middleware licenses, and it doesn't give enough information to make the game hackable. So that's why I was really trying to find any angle I could on this, to just address any kind of concerns. And I think it's mostly just, this takes some effort, and the people making the decisions on this are just looking at us from 100% business oriented perspective. That it's like, well, we don't have to support it. That would, you know, I don't even want to deal with it. I can just end this now and we're fine. That's the industry standard at the moment.
Right.
So
Let me do some more of these.
sure, sure.
Azarea Sky says, Nick, thanks for recommending Dalmore. Got a bottle of their 12-year, smoothest 12-year I've had, and better than many 16s. When I get home, though, I'm pouring some Signet to celebrate Ronica's fail. See you at Matsuri. Sounds good. Sounds good, buddy. Spectrum Ball says, there is a misunderstanding of games as a service. Games as a service is closer to Google Apps. Nothing installed on your PC. Everything runs on the server. You only pay for the access, so you're screwed if the service is gone. Think OnLive. Yeah, we tried to tackle that earlier. Yes, there is a definition of games as a service out there, and what Ross is doing is putting is using the commonly used phrase "games as a service," but defining it in a very specific way to talk about a problem. That's marketing, I think, more than anything.
Oh,
but go ahead. Yeah.
okay, can I jump in on that one?
Yeah, of course.
There's different kinds. There's okay, like let's say at the minimum level, this one isn't too big of an issue now. You'd have something like the new Sim City, or I think when it came out, Assassin's Creed 2 on PC, where the entire game was on the local client, and there was just a bit of DRM that had to connect online only. That part, it's totally artificial, just like an anti-piracy measure. Okay, so that's the minimum level. The medium level, which is a lot of games as a service now, would be like an MMO where all the textures, the sounds, music, model data, the maps, that's all on your computer. But information on how to run it.
Oh,
what?
Sorry, oddly enough, like the bulk of the intellectual property, they give it to you.
Yeah, yeah. but things like where this kobold spawns, or the where this quest connects to, or other things like connect the player, that's going to be on the server side. So the bulk of like you said, the bulk of the copyrighted portion instance that you're buying, that's given to you, and it's just these things that are kind of withheld. And actually, a point I wanted to make: if you wanted to, you could make any game as a service. Like, let's say like Super Mario Brothers. Like, okay, we'll give you the sounds and the textures and everything, but you know what? We're gonna keep where the Goombas spawn, and like where the placement of the coins are. We're going to keep that on our server, and now you have to connect to get that data. Boom, we just made that games as a service.
Right.
So in a lot of cases like that. Now what he's talking about is the next level, and this is where we could be heading, which is what finally just kind of gave me a kick in the pants to get that video made, is stuff like Stadia and OnLive, where just you have nothing. Like it's all streamed to you, and the only thing that's on there on your computer is just an apparatus to receive the video and for you to give input signals to the server that they're containing. So yeah, Google Stadia mentioned that they're going to have exclusive games. So that means that entire game, like just the whole thing, exists on Google servers. There's no way. They haven't established how they're going to be selling that. I mean, it'll probably be a subscription fee, but they actually could swing a perpetual license if they're feeling bold on it, because they could set it up in a way similar to Steam, except you have less. With Steam, it's a free service, but you download the game, and then that's the good that you get.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas they could say that, but well, I don't know, that'd be a weird area. But the point is, games as a service, it's both. There's the kind we have now where it's most of the data is kept on the the client side what you bought, but we're creeping into the territory where you have nothing. And see, that's where I'm getting alarmed by this, because you know what, you mentioned preservation. I'm I'm not actually one of these people that says like everything has to be preserved, but it drives me up the wall seeing people who really want to preserve something. They paid for it, and that's made impossible. So, okay, sorry,
Yeah,
you can go
and
ahead.
well, and those sort of services are going to be they're going to be weird. They're going to be in a little bit different territory because the person who, the Google one apparently is that Stadia or is that on live? I don't remember.
Yeah,
But
well, it's the same model, just about.
right, you buy like a controller that plugs into your TV and you've got nothing. And so in some respects it'll be a little bit different because there is no expectation that you're getting a product. You're getting access to the Stadia library.
Right.
Is how they'll probably bill it. Because I'm guessing they'll you'll have some Stadia fee and then probably some monthly, like depending on what games that you want to play or whatever, you'll pick and choose some. It's like this will add $1.99 a month to your plan or something. If I had to guess, or they'll just do it all through ads and we'll never know. But at least with that, it's getting back towards that MMO model where you have an expectation that at some point this is going to end, and that puts it in a little bit different sort of light, although it's similar. And it is kind of the warning bells. And God, I hope we never get to the point where everything is always online all the time, mainly because I've been
Until it's
thrown
not.
well, I've been thrown off of
Yeah.
Twitter, right? Like I was banned from Twitter for about a week, and it's a weird feeling when one of the largest social media platforms in the world says you can't come on. Like, what? Okay, well, what happens when Google says you can't come on? So you
Brave
can't.
new world, man.
Yeah, you can't play your games. You can't even get it because you can't even buy a physical copy because we won't even let you. It's a weird place. Nova Zero says, "Have you considered that games as a service is neither a product nor a service? Have you considered it's just cancer?" Yeah.
Oh, I had a good comment like that on my video. Somebody says, Ross, you're trying to talk about the difference between goods and services. We all know the opposite of a good is bad.
Yeah, that's very true. Nova Zero says 256-bit encryption is the only thing considered safe as a minimum. When they go online, they keep needing this anti blah blah. Security's a treadmill of death. Most hackers come from gaming. These money men need to wise up. So there you go. Garrett Mazzoni says online only games were a mistake. One Tonga Trunk says thoughts on right to repair legislation. Stuff like proprietary diagnostic software and encrypted architecture is a huge problem with off-road equipment. When only dealers can work on it, equipment becomes a service as well. And yeah, I think you kind of touched on this. I think was it Apple or was that Leor who talked about Apple phones? But it runs hand in hand because, like, I know the big one, actually the company that screwed us all, weirdly enough, is John Deere tractors.
Oh yeah,
because they have their proprietary GPS equipment and they've so fiercely guarded the I guess the tech behind their GPS equipment that you cannot service it on your own. Even though you buy this tractor that might even cost $250,000, but you don't own that GPS that's in it. That's ours, and therefore you don't get to service anything. That tractor is a service in many ways. And
yeah. Well, that's sort of the danger, though. Is like, let's say, well, I'm less familiar with the right to repair stuff, even though there's a lot of overlap. But let's say you get okay, fine, you have the right to repair it. And then we make the encryption so good, nobody's repairing that thing. Or well, that's less of an issue for tractors because you can just gut out the stuff and put in something better. But with games, again, you get checkmates, man, with this stuff. So even if you have the right to do it, that may not matter.
yeah,
It's
but I mean, the way some of these vehicles are being integrated with the computer parts, it's getting to a similar place in games where
oh, okay.
it would actually be really difficult to strip out the software from the hardware that you're buying and actually operate the tractor. I don't know if it's there yet. Games is a much more simple and obvious solution since everything is software. And with at least with the tractor, there's moving parts that work, and so theoretically, if you can get an engine turned, it can make things move. So, but they're getting to the point now where you can't, and I think there's some overlap there. But the Major Spike 9000 says, Ross, I've been a huge fan of your stuff since the bad old days of the now defunct machinima.com. I look forward to all of your content, including the movie, and I hope you make progress with this issue. By the way, he watches from. It just says he watches from, and then it ends.
Oh.
So there you go.
Well, greetings from the mystery land you're from.
But yeah, I eventually I want to talk to you a little bit about Machinima, because people have mentioned that you had some issues with them, and they're not the first issues I've heard of. But yeah, there's one more $20 chat. Talon Sear says, RE, the midday stream, I'm going to err on the side of caution, say that Casey, he's aware of the dumpster fire he's got and is playing his hand as best he can. I don't think he has a choice. Ronica or Nightmare clients. No, actually, Casey very much had a choice in how he dealt with that. Don't get lured into that. Now, he didn't do anything super unethical, maybe, but what he did was... But anyway, let's... Getting into this games as a service stuff a little bit more. You mentioned that there's multiple tiers of it. At the minimum tier, there's like a DRM online piracy check, basically.
Yeah.
And that's like the easiest level for a company to undo. It's like, well, we're going to stop servicing this game, so what do we care? Should be, in my opinion, kind of the way they approach it. So they
even that doesn't always happen. I think games for Windows Live they just drop stuff, and then the pieces mostly got picked up on that, but it wasn't because of them.
Yeah, people have mentioned it quite a bit, actually, the games for Windows Live thing being shut down. But so there's the DRM check, okay. And you're talking about minimum effort, and the minimum effort would be to just turn off the DRM check or provide a patch that removes
whatever documentation on the protocols with how the client communicates to the server that they have on hand. That's not code. It's just, if it's sending this bit and it's saying, okay, well, if you're trying to build a server emulator, you have no idea what that does, and then they're documenting, okay, that's actually for the shopkeepers in the store, the loading what inventory they have or something. It gives them a fighting chance, I guess.
Right. But then you have that next tier, and this is what you were talking about with Super Mario Brothers, and what we see with games like Diablo 3, for example, where they require this, some sort of always on connectivity because the server is handling some task integral to gameplay. And this, I think, is where the core of your argument really is.
This is how most games as a service are right now.
Right. And not just most games, I mean, many games, a shocking amount of games, even single player. Like you're playing Diablo 3 by yourself, and you still have to be connected to the internet because for some reason, your computer can't handle the code.
If they keep the information that you need to play the game on the server, guess what? It's games as a service now, Right. Again, you could do that to Super Mario Brothers. Would not be hard to set it up that way if you wanted to.
Yeah, and it's some... I understand why some games do it. Again, with Diablo 3, one thing they saw with Diablo 2 was a rampant amount of hacking and stuff like that was going on. Actually, specifically with Diablo 1, where everything was held client-side and only Battle.net was actually moderating the I guess the connection, the basically peer-to-peer connections for two clients to hook up. Like Tinder or whatever. And then you got Diablo 2, which had a little bit more, but still mostly the stuff is client side, and they still had hacking problems because they had map hack. They had things that would prevent people from, or would give them competitive advantages. And Diablo 2 did have a PvP sort of thing, and they had ladder and rankings and stuff like that. And Diablo 3 doesn't have PvP, but it does have a ranked ladder sort of thing. And so you kind of understand where they're coming from with this. It's like, well, we want to control this so that no one's hacking to violate the ranking system. And I think with stuff like Major League Gaming and stuff becoming more prevalent, there's an interest in doing that. But ultimately, like, we're not talking about the main life of the product. And that's where...
Yeah, I'm not arguing there's no good reason to have games as a service. There's lots of advantages for both parties, actually. What I'm arguing, there's no reason that means you also have to destroy the game and no one can ever play it in any form again once you're done supporting it. You see, as long as they keep the game going, it's the thing, none of these companies have end-of-life plans just about.
Right.
That's the thing I'm after. Like an end of life plan. What do we do once the game's run its course for us?
Right. So that's where I think your argument needs to focus. I mean, just from my perspective. And so I was kind of curious if you have any, as you've been getting feedback from other lawyers and other people on this, like what is kind of your idea on where to take this? I mean, I have ideas, but I'm kind of curious what you've been seeing as sort of the solution, or if there is one.
Well, I'm a little more cynical on this. I'm again, from when I made the video, I was seeing that distinction between a goods and a service as the main opening. Although it could be that they could acclimate the consumer to just buying everything as a service, in which case, yeah, that might be a checkmate for me. Honestly, right now, under US law, I'm not seeing a lot of promise. In fact, I'm almost ready to write it off under US law. That's part of why I want to talk to attorneys. Like, are you seeing any angle at all on this? I'm seeing much more optimism. Again, in Canada, they define software as a service as goods. In Australia, they had that court case, the ACCC versus Valve, where they define, no, you're selling goods. This kind of software. And the European Union, I'm getting more confused by. Someone contacted me saying in France that they have these laws against planned obsolescence, and actually software wasn't included there because it was assumed that software can't go bad, essentially, because it's just data.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so maybe there's an opening there that's saying, oh, well, in principle that's true, but in practice, it's essentially operating the same way as planned obsolescence with these games are set up. And the thing is, even if the US progress can't be made, let's say the European Union ruled that, you can't do this. You've got to have an end of life plan or else we're going to fine you. It is so much cheaper to have an end of life plan for these games than to pay the fines or fight that in court. Actually, one person who works in the industry told me that for smaller scale games, like let's say, well, I mentioned Lawbreakers or Nosgoth, but say something like Quake Champions or something like that. If you have an end of life plan from the beginning, from the design phase, he's saying the extra cost would be free. Like if you plan for that ahead of time, he's saying the cost to have a functioning version of that. He said it wouldn't cost anything in terms of extra work. He said an MMO would, like a World of Warcraft kind of thing, but I don't think I was exaggerating in the video where I'm saying, even having that minimum effort plan would be well under 1% of the total budget. But
it'd be
US,
basically.
You tell me. You're the attorney here.
Well, I mean, that end of life plan, actually, it'd be almost a negligible cost. Some patch that basically says, once this is executed, once they press the button, then all of the server client relationship is terminated and all of the server processing duties go to the client. I mean, for the overwhelming majority of games, the heavy lifting is done client side. We're talking about rendering, the physics engines, all of that stuff is done client side. The the calculations of numbers that make things be in place, that's actually not a ton of work as far as I understand. Someone, I guess
It
some
depends on the game. Like, I think the worst case scenario would be I looked it up. EVE Online has had at one point it had a total of 65,000 people all playing at the same time, all in the same universe. So
right.
again, I'm not arguing. There's no way you're gonna a user with just access to the server code can handle that. But at the same time, if they can support their whole clan, their former clan in the game, and we can still go to this universe, and then maybe some people will pitch in and get a more dedicated server to get 1,000 people or something.
Right, and
It's
that's a step beyond, I think, the initial thing. I'm mostly focusing on the idea of like a single player sort of client that you get to preserve, where
yeah,
there's a
just
server you're
anything.
interacting, right, and that
Anything.
server step can come later for hosting multiple people. But like we're talking, when I'm talking about a single player game where you're connected and they're just handling the spawn locations and stuff like that, the amount of processing that's being done on the server is minimal. And if you think about it, it would kind of have to be, because these things aren't running on supercomputers. I mean, they're running on decent sized server racks and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's just business grade hardware. It's not government supercomputer hardware running this
Yeah,
stuff.
actually, I heard for Destiny 2, I haven't confirmed it, but someone was telling me that most of the traffic is actually handled by peer-to-peer processing, and it's just the central server sort of overlooking everything
Right.
and coordinating it. So it's the users are kind of doing most of the heavy lifting on that anyway. But I will say though, again, somebody could correct me in the. Actually, I can't see the chat, but that's okay.
Oh, do you want the
Uh,
link to it? Would that be? I could
um,
message it to
I,
you.
I might. Well, we'll see. The I was gonna say the way these game. There's a difference too between trying to do this after the fact versus you're planning for this from the beginning. If it's after the fact, you talk about you're not as focused on the server side of it. It could be that's the path of least resistance because they already made the server. It's like, okay, well, here's the server software. You guys handle it. We're washing our hands of the matter, and that could be a lot less work at that phase than kind of converting it all to a client side level thing that can run as a standalone product that takes testing. See, I'm for anything. I'm for making this as easy as possible on the companies.
Yeah,
I'm I
but I
know how
mean,
it is. They'll have to do more support. It's
yeah.
not fun.
So all they do is release the server software in some cases, and in other cases, it's literally just a patch that says that the DRM is no longer necessary or
Yeah, turn off the
whatever,
encryption. Yeah,
and then everything works just fine, because the systems that, my point in all this is that the systems that are rendering games today are capable of rendering the current game plus doing the few minor random number generation tasks that are going on in the background to put mobs on the map, right? Like
yeah.
this is not heavy stuff. um I think there's a couple ways to go about it legally. I mean, you could really put together a case about, kind of going off of the themes you started with, that this is a sale of a good, that it's disingenuous. I actually do think that not only, I know you're saying that they're defrauding the government, not the consumer. I think in many ways they're defrauding the consumer. You could attack end user license agreements, especially with software. They've been attacked before. And companies have been forced to change practices. One of the big cases, I can't remember who it was, but basically they were forced to issue refunds if people ended up disagreeing with the EULA. And the problem being, they're basically getting a 30-page document that couldn't be printed on the box material that was being sold. So
I
people,
feel like that's ways companies. I feel like companies could find ways to get it, so that doesn't address the core problem.
right. But I'm saying there's a comprehensive sort of approach that you could take from the legal strategy. I don't think it's the best plan, is where I'm ultimately getting with this. Because like you could
Yeah.
attack the idea that this contract's illusory, that the contract isn't necessary, and then yes, eventually eventually they're going to say, well, at what point does a consumer bear the responsibility to learn what we're selling them? And then the counter argument is, well, at what point are you actually being clear about what you're selling? And so then they find that point, but then we end up kind of back where we are. I think the faster method is to literally legislate it. Either you mentioned like the EU as an opportunity, any major market, major economic market, and it doesn't have to be that major. The EU's market is big, but it could be what Lior was saying at the state level: California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois. These large states have millions of potential customers. And like you said, if the EU were to pass it and say you need some sort of end of life plan, that would apply to any of the major states in the U.S. as well. There's one state that's attacking loot boxes, for example, right now. And they're doing it under the kind of the auspices of online gambling and exploitation of minors, because minors are spending money on these microtransactions. But it's there could certainly be legislation, and it may sound ridiculous to kind of legislate this stuff, but I think legislators are courting voters that care about this.
Well, so, I'm a little more pessimistic on that. I think the loot boxes are an easier shot there because they ride on existing gambling laws, and politicians have always loved taking like the moral high ground on stuff like that. Yeah, especially once you mention kids and predatory behavior. If they can say that they're stopping your kids from turning into zombies or something, or casino addicts or whatever, that can play a lot better, I think, in politics. This is something where I think the issue is kind of at a permanent disadvantage, because gamers can absolutely kind of raise hell about all kinds of issues, but it's usually when it's immediate and right in front of their face, because people, raised all sorts of controversy about something like Diablo 3, not because they were doing this necessarily, but because the servers were overloaded so they couldn't play their game at the beginning.
Right.
And by definition, the majority of these games that get shut down, they have just a small minority of players left that care about them. So it's a perpetual minority. I mean, if you go on it long enough, enough people are gonna find that game that they care about, that they didn't want shut down. But by then, they're always in the minority. And I don't know, with legislation, another reason I'm less optimistic is, look, once you get into creation of new laws on this, even I recognize there are many much more serious issues than this that, politicians not necessarily going to want to tackle when they could be tackling something like their constituents getting evicted from their homes or something like that.
Don't hold on, careful.
Okay.
Let's not try and make politicians into people who are at all good at determining what is important or not. If you do that, you're going to severely overestimate your target demographic.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess
here's how you sell it to
I'm skeptical if gamers could actually scare politicians into thinking like this could cost them a vote or something.
Well, here's how you do it. I sit on the board of a charity, and that charity invests into various different stocks globally. One of the fund managers of a fund that we have part of our pool of money sunk into, they do a lot of foreign investment, and he came to explain that this is a fund manager who's been doing this for decades and decades and decades. He came to us to explain what their fund's actual investments are, and we found out that it's like it's speculative investment, and it's heavily leveraged in stuff like Major League Gaming, because it's an emerging market, but the size of the market is massive. Major League Gaming is in many ways outperforming Major League Sports in the US economically.
Wow.
For example, the largest sporting event ever watched is League of Legends finals. I think last year. It's and I mean it is. It was the largest sporting event ever watched across the globe, and they had something like 90,000 people there live. So we're talking Super Bowl level attendance in person, plus bigger than Super Bowl audiences outside. Um, so when you start, if your idea is to lobby a legislature about this, you start by talking about one, where money is going, and money is
Right.
going increasingly to games. We see these AAA
Oh
titles
yeah.
that they're doing. I found out a booth from the same fund manager. He said a AAA booth at E3, the rental for it is $3 million to rent that booth. So 2K Studios or whatever it's 2K Studios AAA? I don't know. Bethesda.
Sure.
Their booth costs $3 million just to rent the space. Not to mention
Yeah.
what they do at the booth. We're talking huge amounts of money going into these things. Hollywood levels of money are starting to flood into games. So that's your first thing.
Oh yeah, it's something like $100 billion industry from last year or something like that. I mean,
Yeah, it's massive. Your second prong is that the amount of the donor class that is coming up are guys our age. Actually, I don't know how old you are, but I assume you're somewhere around my age. Um, but
yeah.
we're you got your mid 30s guys grew up on video games. Your older class, my parents' generation, for
Yeah, they're
example,
not gonna care
uh,
about this.
they don't, but they're also going to, heaven forbid, they're gonna be passing away. They're the reducing. We're the incoming class of people who are supporting politicians, and that money is going to be fueled by people who play video games, not by people who read The Economist and stuff like that. We're at this point where there's a real changing of hands, where our generation, and particularly the next generation of voters, have spent the majority of our lives online and with video games as a reality, not video games as as some sort of not nerdy enthusiast hobby. I mean, I'll put the release of Halo 1 as the point where gaming really went full mainstream. Just it's an arbitrary date, but I think it'd be
Yeah,
useful. That was what, 2001.
one or something like that. Yeah.
So that was 18 years ago, we'll say, which puts a 2-year window on what I'll call the event horizon for me, which is where I will have spent the majority of my life with video games as being an acceptable, normal, mainstream media. And I set that at Halo 1. I mean, someone else can set it somewhere different, but that'll be the majority of my adult life, and anyone who's my age or older. So that horizon will change, will actually get, I guess, shorter for each person younger than me. They'll have spent more and more of their life, down to a person who's 18 will have spent their entire life, birth to voting, knowing only that video games are not like a nerd hobby they're a mainstream hobby and a mainstream piece of media.
Yeah.
So I do think there's potential to actually lobby politicians on this, because their
Yeah.
donor class is going to be people who have grown up with this stuff and care about it. So,
Well, I'm certainly not going to be able to come at them from a donor class angle.
well, you don't have
Uh, but,
to.
but I was going to say
You
that's
weaponize the
actually, yeah,
people.
if I can, uh, yeah, that's a different world that I'm familiar with. But you were, I think the connection, there's a danger of this cutting both ways, though, a little bit. Not the attempts, not the attempts, but you mentioned the average gamer age. I got a few people who came out just incredibly against me what I said in the video, and one I was kind of laughing at. They were calling this like the height of millennial entitlement and everything, and I thought that was funny at first, and then I stopped and thought about it. I was saying, well, wait a minute, they actually have a point there inadvertently, that the see again, like the older generation, baby boomers are largely not going to care about this, and Generation X some, but not as significant a portion. Millennials absolutely, because we've kind of grown up. If we enjoy media, we can keep it and it runs. Like cassette tapes for music or VHS tapes for video and DVDs, and it kind of evolved, and cartridges or discs for games. So this is honestly kind of a new, well, for me, kind of a bit of a shock, that like, wow, they were just destroying this. You cannot own it in any way. But then the younger generation, they might be kind of growing up. Even now, a lot of people, I'd say maybe even the majority in gaming, don't realize that, you know, that once the company shuts down the server, well, of course multiplayer doesn't work. Why would it work? Whereas we've grown up, we've seen that, like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. There are plenty of old games you could run now if you have friends or something that you want to run them on. That's not really a meaningful distinction, but I think the industry has sort of won that PR battle, thinking, oh yeah, well, for single player games you should be able to run them, but for multiplayer, well, of course, when the server doesn't work, you can't run the game. And like, I think I've already kind of lost on that front. So the young, the younger they get, and the more this practice kind of invades, this may not even be a value that's kind of held enough. But again, that cluster won't be the one with more political power until later. But
Yeah, and
uh,
I'm not commenting on the wisdom of doing it. I mean, personally, I'm opposed to government intervention in almost anything. I just am by default, because I trust the government to do one thing, and that's screw up whatever it touches.
I'm kind of an end results person. Like, okay, well, are we better or worse? Both. Okay, well, how much worse and how much
Right.
better?
Well, but my point in saying that is, like, I don't know that it would be the wisest approach, but if what I'm encouraging the idea that if you want to push this, if you really want to do it, what you need to do is you need to find um, a politician or a couple politicians who understand, one, this generation, which is sometimes tough to do, but not as tough as it was, or who see the economic or even political value in this generation and are willing to take this. I mean, you've got we honestly have a guy. I mean, I know they're talking about it on gambling things, but they're legislating on loot boxes, and they're legislating on. But where does that? Why are they legislating on loot boxes? Probably because the biggest downvoted Reddit post of all time was that one with the stupid Star
Oh
Wars
yeah, the
loot
Battlefront.
boxing, right? The Battlefront loot box on getting characters. I mean, politicians are dumb, but they're not that dumb, and they certainly can. If they fumble around enough, they'll find the pulse of what people care
Yeah,
about.
that'd be. People can contact me about that if you want. My email is rosswscott@gmail. Uh, if you know, like, what was the procedure, like, how did they get from a bunch of people upset about loot boxes to actual examination of it? Although, again, I guess that's why I'm still not completely sold on the US, though, because see, what I would prefer would be something much more like what happened with
Well, it doesn't
like
have to
the
be the
ACCC
U.S.
versus Valve, where you actually have a consumer com- commission with a little more teeth, and it's going to take this issue more seriously, just from a consumer rights perspective. And they can lay out the case against a company that you can find a lot of cases where they're violating this. And
Have you? Sorry, I didn't
yeah.
mean to
No,
interrupt,
no, go ahead, go
but
ahead.
have you talked to anybody at the EFF?
Not yet, not yet.
That's where I would start,
Okay,
honestly.
I'm trying to figure out the best approach to that, to kind of lay out the argument in a page. And
I mean,
see, I think my
you know they
best.
hate digital rights, or like
Oh yeah, yeah.
digital rights
Oh yeah.
restrictions,
See,
I
there
should say.
will. Hey, see, I'm not even trying to stop DRM, but I mean, I'm fine if that does get stopped. But I'm just trying to get just any. We're getting nothing now. See, you mentioned the government earlier. I wasn't exaggerating in the video. Where the fact that we're gonna have exclusive streaming games means this cannot get any worse. We can see the ratio get worse. I mean, we can see, instead of just let's say 10% games of the service that go to 50% or 60%. Yeah, that can get worse, but it doesn't get any worse than exclusive streaming games, because you have nothing. You have absolutely nothing from a preservationist perspective and just wanting to own what you buy. perspective, both of those, uh, it's so like even if the law came out completely against this, saying like no, what these companies are doing is absolutely within the confines of the law, and we establish precedent that prevents future cases like this. Well, then at least we know. One thing some attorneys agreed with me on was that this is a gray area with the goods versus services argument. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, yeah. Here, okay. Well, unless you need to go to chat questions or something.
Well, eventually, I'm gonna start those from the sub $20 chats in just a second, and we'll kind of go through those. But I would suggest the EFF is a good place to start.
Yeah.
You know, your video's pushing close to 1 million views. Well, it's
Oh, wow, I
700,000
haven't
views.
checked it too.
I think I've
Yeah,
got it.
it's the second most popular one I think I've made on my channel, which and
So
it's not because the video is that entertaining. It's over an hour me mostly talking about the law, so it hit a nerve for sure.
that was a
Yeah.
little bit rude what you just did there.
Oh, what I do?
You said that
Oh,
videos over an hour, mostly talking about the law,
oh, I'm
aren't
sorry.
very...
Well, okay. Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm
well,
just kidding.
what's the last video you made that got what 600, 700,000 views? Maybe you have some.
Zero of them.
Yeah,
No.
it's not against you, it's against the law, man. Look,
Yeah, no.
look, you
I'm
can
just
you
messing
can
with you.
dress up the law, but that's not what's gonna. I mean, maybe if you're John Grisham novels, you could spice it up some more. Like, look, I mean,
No, I'm just messing with you, of course. But no,
yeah,
what I'm saying is you've got something that people have latched onto. You could certainly bring that to EFF and say, look, I mean,
oh yeah, yeah. I
you've
plan on
got some...
contacting him.
Yeah, that's where I'd start. I would say that you're not wrong to lose faith in the US on legislating this. Um, and maybe the EFF, I'm sure they have partners, partner organizations in different countries, but the EU is certainly a good spot. Like you said, all you need is a big enough market. A big enough market and a big enough consumer protection group. Canada may even be enough, although I'm not really sure there's more than about 12 Canadians in actuality. So I'm not 100% sold on them, but anywhere with strong consumer protection laws. And yeah, you just approach it as the fact that people are buying something that they can't get, they can't keep, just because,
Yeah,
and for no real practical reason. There
well,
is
minimal. Yeah,
the only reason that we can't keep it in the future is because of, well, we didn't make it so they could.
yeah, and we didn't want to take any effort to allow that to happen. None. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I'm willing to accept the whole gray area from source code to a functioning server to the patch client to just those notes to give people and to turning off the encryption. Oh, okay. Before I forget, if I can ask you a quick question
Yeah, of course.
from the perpetual and subscription license perspective, goods versus services. In your rough opinion, do you think that would have any opening for courts in the U.S., or would that just be real uphill battle?
The problem with US courts in technology in general, this is a general thing, is they're about a decade to 2 decades behind. The real um the real issue is that a judge, uh, Leor said this is a states issue, and maybe, but a lot of it's going to be federal because a lot of this is interstate commerce, which gets kind of deep into it. But ultimately, you're looking at trying to convince a 70-year-old white man, a white male or whatever. No, but you're
Whatever.
trying to convince a 70-year-old white guy why this matters in court, and you're talking about a guy who bartered for a television by making a chair. Not, I'm exaggerating, but
Well, I'm wondering if that could work to the advantage though, because on the basic level, you bought it, and now every single person who bought it it no longer works, and they can't repair it, and
yeah,
they
and
stop you from repairing it.
it
Yeah, yeah,
you
fine. Let's treat it like a toaster.
yeah,
Like that might actually work to keep it simple in that way.
you may be able to do that, but it's what I'm saying is
But it would
there's
only be that judge, and then it would get shut down if it got appealed.
maybe maybe, but it's just the idea of convincing the court, be it the district court, the Circuit Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court, where you ultimately would have to end up with this. It's the idea of convincing all of these old people who are not in video games that one, this is a problem, and explaining the tech to them.
Like, well, this is a game. This is stupid. Get out of my court. You know.
I mean, and
yeah.
For one example, there's a semi-recent case that Scalia did just before he died. It was US v. Jones, and this is a case where it was an unlawful search case where cops had put a GPS tracking device on the bottom of a car and followed it around. But their warrant had expired the day they put it on, the day before they put it on. So they got a warrant to do it, but it expired. So then they put this GPS tracking device on the bottom of the car. And Scalia ruled that that was an unconstitutional search. But the reason he ruled that is because they physically put something on the car. And he overlooked the fact that the government, and he actually kind of said it was okay, that the government was literally following that car around everywhere it went for several days. And the reason he said that was okay is because, well, if you were out on the street, you might see this person at a stoplight. So then you would have seen them out in public, and the government's just looking at you on a public road, and anybody could find you on a public road. It's like, but he was failing to like identify the idea that someone would not just see you on a public road, but also follow you to literally everywhere you went over the next 10 days without sleeping, because that's what the government was doing. And so you've got this case, and to lay out the timeline of the case, this is in 2006. The court rules on it ultimately in 2012, the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
By the time the court's ruling on it, cops no longer need to attach a GPS device to your car because they just go to your carrier and basically get a tap on the GPS chip in your phone. And at some point really soon, they'll just get a tap on the GPS unit that's in every single car. And Scalia's opinion fails to address any of that. And so he's ruling on technology that is, by the time the Supreme Court is hearing it, bordering on obsolete already. So when I'm saying the court is a decade to 2 decades behind on tech issues, by the time you get this to the Supreme Court level, even if you started the case today, you're talking 7 to 10 years before the Supreme Court is even close to hearing it. Okay. And that horizon might be, at that point, is every game a service. Whereas if you go with the legislative route, the advocacy route, and rallying the support that clearly there's at least 670,000 people who have watched your video who agree, and we have to assume that you've only even achieved a small, tiny percentage of exposure amongst the general populace that's out there. But
well, you know, the general populace may not care, but gamers, yeah, this is pretty black and white.
Right, but I'm just saying, like in the economics of scale here, you've reached a huge audience, an audience that's 3 times the size, roughly 3 times the size of your channel audience, your subscriber audience.
Oh yeah.
So there's something to it, and you have, I think, shortening the window on action is going directly to the idea of getting some sort of lawmaker with a proper advocacy group like the EFF to tackle this issue in that way. That's how I would do it. And the reason I bring all that up is because that's what you were kind of asking for at the end of your stream is, what are suggestions? How do we do this?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I said in the video, I either need this to stop or to be defeated. You know, if I'm convinced from authority, like, no, this angle will not, I'm not going to fight a hopeless war on this, but I'll fight one with, you know, poor odds, I guess. You know.
Yeah, well, I
need an opening somewhere, you know. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're doing it. I really do. And you should be encouraged with doing it too. Because, you know, this is something where it is kind of the role of government to protect the rights that we buy, or at least to clarify what those rights are. And maybe they say the opposite. Maybe they say, no, we don't. You know, you don't have that. That's not what you do. And then at least we're all ostensibly on the same page instead of this gray area. And tech and games and media are at a place where we have advanced well beyond the law, in this. And so trying to, I mean, you've seen all the analogies that you came up with are I found them to be helpful. Other people found them terrible. That's fine. Someone sent to me that the better analogy would be a lifetime ticket to an amusement park and then the amusement park shutting down. It's like, well, except that that would only be if you brought all the rides with you.
And the amusement park said they do not provide an amusement park service. What they do is they sell tickets. They're in the business of selling paper pulp to you, and you know they none of their business is like a service
Yeah. So
thing. You know, that's the other distinction. You know,
right. So these
there
analogies
are
aren't.
few real world analogies to this because it kind of works against consumer rights in ways that weren't even possible in the past. You know, I think my park one was pretty solid. You know, because the park in itself is kind of a metaphor for the code. You know, the
Yeah.
code's been made. You know, that's not going to expire. All this extra stuff that's tacked on again, like admins, game updates, being able to support thousands of players. Yeah, that's the service portion of it. But
That, but
the
that's a
rest of it,
lifeguard.
what?
That's a lifeguard. You can swim in a pool
Yeah,
without a
exactly. The
lifeguard.
pool is still there. The lifeguard is the service. Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah,
But my point in this is that the analogies are hard to come up with because we're in
they
an
are.
we've developed this thing beyond where the law was. It's like social media. I mean, our social media is regulated, or specifically not regulated by sections 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which was passed in 1996 before social media existed, and with a different expectation of what was possible because they didn't have algorithmic review. Like, no one would have thought in 1996 that you could have a video upload service called YouTube where you could live stream 3 hours of content, and after it live streamed, while it was uploading for literal presumed permanent storage on into the foreseeable future, that it would also go through a processing phase where an AI algorithm would review every word spoken on there and look for certain triggers like suicide notes and stuff like that, or other objectionable content, and it would actually be able to review the data to find similarities with like child pornography and stuff like that and report it immediately. Like, no one in 1996 could have fathomed that this was even a possible technology. And so when Section 230 was written, this is the thing that gives immunity to companies like YouTube for the stuff posted to their platform. They said there's no way a platform could ever monitor everything that was put on it. But now we have companies literally monitoring every single thing. And those companies are far bigger in scale than anything that was even possible in 1996.
I was gonna say, and that service is also like a functional de facto monopoly, you know,
Right.
for the
Right. So
it's much closer to science fiction stories than what was happening in 96. So.
right. So the point is, like, the laws regulating the internet were written in 1996 when the internet was largely like we can't even imagine the fact that we were putting discs into a computer for 25 free hours of America Online, and that was like a cool thing to get back when this law was actually drafted. You were getting a 25-hour internet session for free for a month, and you're like, whoa, this is more internet than I could even possibly use. Like, that's when the law was written about social media now. And so the trying to look at games as a service in the auspices of existing law and hammer it into that square peg into a round hole,
fool's errand.
It's an uphill battle because the law isn't made for it in that way. So that's why I think the advocacy route might be a more effective approach. And I think the unwritten message of like Leor might have been similar. Like, look for ways to to advocate for this. The legal route might be difficult, but
that's why I might go outside the U.S. because, again, man, one major sales district is all it takes to, I think, kill most of this. Because See, loot boxes are different in that regard. They are going to fight them to the ends of the earth because that brings them so much money from
Yep.
doing loot boxes. Whereas here, you can make it a path of least resistance thing because it is not pricey to have an end of life plan for these companies.
They could write, I mean, if they know about it, they could
Yeah.
they
Oh
could
yeah.
create the dead man switch at the time of development, and it would cost them near nothing in the scope of
That's
development.
also why I was arguing not getting too deep into the version update. Let's say they just want to get it all out of the way for version 1.0, and then fine, we kill the game. It's on 3.6. Well, we release our 1.0 code because we already did it and we're done. You know, it could be an effortless shutdown at the end too. Now, yeah, people would argue that maybe they're not getting what their money's worth, but that's I'm not even trying for that level.
Right, right. Well, we'll so
Yeah, you have
what
some
I'm
chat questions.
I've got a bunch of chats, and so what I like to do at this point is welcome you to stay as long as you want, but however, respecting that you've already given me 2 hours of time, which I really do appreciate. I want to
Sure.
say
Well,
that at any point, if you need to go, because my policy, I read all of the super chats that come in. It's just how I roll. But if at any point you need to go, feel free
oh,
to let me
can
know.
hey, look, because I had to short term memorize the lines for that video. Just the filming of that took me a little over 11 hours over a course of a couple days.
Ooh,
Because
ooh,
it's not because I would look at the line, I'd say it to the camera, and then I would forget it. It's like that's why you have those cuts in between. That's me. That's about as far as I could go without really memorizing it.
sure, sure. Well,
No, I'll hang around for this. I mean,
awesome, awesome. LM Garrick says you're doing God's work, Ross. Will killing games be the movie plot?
no, not at all. You know, the the thing about I completely recognize. I'll bring this up that there are more serious issues in this. I kind of think of where we are now as sort of like the bread and circuses kind of existence, and I feel like I'm trying to stop the circus from being ruined. You know,
Right.
it's like I can't even have my circus of the gladiator fights. We got to ruin that too. That's the whole point to distract you from the more important stuff. So the movie's gonna be escapism. Like I want escapism, fun stuff. So
Sure. Karite Sumatai says, Nick, I really did sub at $10. Please let me in. Yes, I will. I've had the busiest day. I'm so sorry. I'll get to your email and make sure you get in. Shadow Golf says, Nick, you rock. I'll catch your stream on the replay. Thank you. Kiwi Goes Live says, Mars Girl sexually assaulted me in Las Vegas from Sacramento. I thought I was safe, but no one can outrun Mars Girl. Well, no one can outrun her arms, I think. Bill Wilson says, my two favorite content creators on a stream together. Cheers to y'all. Thank you. Mark Royland says, Nick, thanks for all you do. Ross, love your work. Spiderbot is my favorite game dungeon, and I've watched it several times.
oh, thank you.
Solo Beverly says, late and gay. Neil Purcell says, late and fearful of Big Bang. No one is fearful of Big Bang Theory. Or is that... Oh, Big Blag. I don't know what Big Blag is. Steph Dev says, hashtag pro Jared down 100,000 subs in 24 hours. Oof. Ooh. That's not good. Did you hear about that thing? The pro Jared thing?
No, I tend to be late on hearing internet news.
Yeah, I've never heard of pro Jared, but apparently he announced his divorce live on Twitter yesterday.
Oh,
and then a whole bunch of the fallout from that was immediate. And now he's down 100,000 subs, I guess, which is kind of crazy to think about. Bagel Goose says, have Ross show his feet. Do you have any interest in showing your feet on camera?
Not really, but I found out. Here we go. Suck.
Ooh.
I found out recently. I made my feet are weird. Yeah, my wife is still sort of shocked at how they look because they're sort of like duck feet. They don't have webbing, but they're very wide. I found out recently I may be size 10 extra wide because I've always had trouble finding shoes.
Oh, sure.
So
yeah, I have pretty wide feet too. I know how that goes. Like you find a shoe, it's like, oh, this fits, and then you get home and
And
walk
then it's like
around.
elf shoes where they you know, like, where they have, like, the little curl at the end, so it's like it fits on this part, and then you have all this extra gap that doesn't fit, so
Oh, Big Blag is the boss from the flipping surfing level in Battletoads 1. Oh gosh, I'm gonna turn in my gamer card. For
well, I know
failing to.
Battletoads music, you know, like the
Yeah.
different
Do do
tracks.
do 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 do. Oh, it's so good. I love it.
I know lots of game soundtracks,
Uh,
and here, I'll throw some to maybe you might be interested in this, I'll give a plug here. You were talking about liquor earlier. I'm no expert on that, but I've seen this old YouTube series. I just couldn't look away. I found it hilarious. It's called Liquor Euthanasia. It's about this guy that was drinking these 20-year-old, just real cheap wines, essentially putting them out of their misery. And then he would just sort of review them as he goes. If you have a sadistic drinking streak, you should definitely check that out. It's, yeah, Liquor Euthanasia. You want
I like to see people enjoy their liquor, and I like to see people torment themselves with it. So.
yeah, oh yeah, he's acting like he's on a mission, but you could tell it's a hard mission for him. So.
U.S. debt crisis says, question for Ross. Hey Ross, when are you going to get back in contact with Snipe to make more civil protection episodes?
Once we get something working in Unreal, man, I'm not going back to the source engine. Like it's uh to give you an analogy here, it's like say you're a good race car driver, even though this car is kind of half busted and it veers to the left, and you got to pump the brakes a certain way, otherwise they give out. But but you've gotten so good at that car that maybe you can race competitively with it. Except you also know if you go on a long enough race, that car is going to catch on fire at some point.
Right.
Like maybe it's 5 minutes in, maybe it's an hour in. That's the analogy I make to the source engine. It's like I can't go back to it. So I've got to learn. I've got to get farther in on Unreal. So
God of Plague says, hi Ross, like your machinima and reviews.
thank you.
There you go. Guns Down in Hail says, loved your vids back from the machinima days. I heard, so machinima, is that like both a genre and a channel network?
Yeah, it's like Kleenex. You know,
Right.
it's like it was a company, and it was also the name of the medium. You know, the medium being movies made using games to kind of make them. So
Very, very weird. Uh, now
yeah,
you had issues with machinima, the channel
the
network though.
company. Yeah,
I think a lot of people
yeah.
did.
Uh, Shortest version is they put me in a position where I couldn't release new videos until I agreed to a new contract. And it took me months to get me that contract, to just even show me a draft of it. And that I talked with them about provisions I needed to, reflect my old one. They said I could have that. Then when I saw that, I saw it was a complete lie that didn't have that. During that time, they also lost my old contract. They tried to claim ownership over all my videos based on provisions I never agreed to. Then, like, basically, they were trying to go against my contract, like that I signed with them, and
Sure.
that I had protections built in. And they stonewalled me at every way. And pretty much the only way I got that resolved was basically to say I was going to take kind of legal action. And then that kind of will come. Best quick analogy I can make to that is with the law in some companies, you might think this is like a chess game and you need the best strategy. It's when the reality is the chess game is just a diversion, and really you only win if you stop somebody else from pickpocketing you while you were playing chess. Like that
Yeah.
was the real game. I, they were just they didn't care about the contract that they signed, like, and the protections in it.
Right.
So
Because you're at an inherent disadvantage.
no, no,
Uh,
no, no, no. By the contract, I was protected,
right. But
and they
then you
they
had to.
didn't care. The legal department didn't care. You
Right,
know.
because you'd have to enforce the contract, and that would put a
Yeah,
big
and the
burden on
fact that they
you.
were willing to come up with an agreement on that, I think even arbitration would have looked poorly on them. I had so much evidence of what they were doing. I was saving all the emails and everything. So
Sure, sure. Ravelin1 says creating a game with a secret preordained end date sounds like a fraudulent multi-level marketing scheme. The latest people to sign on don't know that the dead man switch has already been thrown. There are laws against pyramid schemes. I think that comment is based on misunderstanding what we're talking about. We're not talking about preordaining an end date. What we're talking about is the game company having an end of life, whenever that may be, plan in place at the time that they create the game, so that once when they go to shut, when they're like, okay, we're going to stop supporting this game, whenever that is, they go ahead and press the button that then opens the game up and releases anything like DRM, and would allow people to acquire the parts of the game that were necessary to run it on their own. We're not talking about them setting up a time to shut down the game. We're talking about them setting up the plan to open up the game when they're through supporting it. So that would be the idea there. Hopefully that helps clear up any confusion. Chris Nemo says the Texan 83 is bitch made, which is a little strong. Try Bane says my mother called Vic Nick Toye today. Oh. Canonist Coma says loved your Deus Ex vid Accursed Farms. Keep it up. Did you do the old Deus Ex game or the new one?
I did the 3 at the time. I did the old one, then Invisible War, and then Human Revolution.
Oh, okay.
I did that right before the Mankind Divided came out. So.
Sure. Tribane says she is also very, very sorry for combining your names. Well, she should be, but I forgive her. Keck7 Go says, remember to talk about Machinima, Boomer. We did. Vash Lancet says, hey, Accursed Farms, love all of your content. Been watching since the single digits of Freeman's Mind. Are you going to make more?
Yeah, Freeman's Mind is probably going to be my next video, and then I'm keeping it going. Fans, I was originally going to retire it, but the fan support was so overwhelming, I'm continuing it. So
everybody I've talked to mentioning you immediately goes to Freeman's Mind. So I'm going to be on a plane tomorrow, but I'm going to download a bunch of them because I gotta see what these are like.
It's not for everyone. I don't blame anyone for not liking it. But
well, I mean, I bought Half-Life 2 at release. I played Half-Life 1. Well, I played Half-Life 2 as well, but I played Half-Life 1, and having a paranoid Gordon Freeman sounds funny to me. Alice James says, 2 favorite people in one stream. I heart Freeman's Mind. John Turcott says, thanks for making law interesting and entertaining. Oh, you're welcome. Sin B says, I still have dreams where I'm playing SOCOM 1 or Resident Evil Outbreak online, but never again since the servers were shut down. RIP.
Oh, I think there is an emulator for that on the PlayStation 2.
Ooh.
Somebody got it functioning for multiplayer for a lot of games. I think SOCOM might be on there. I don't know what the name of it is, but
Vash Lancet says there are even some games where they are split between 3 to 4. GoldenEye 64 being tied up by the movie and 2 companies, which can't be remade. Yeah, so the rights to those games being owned by 3 to 4 different companies. Keck7 Go says, shout out to my girl Books. If she's still up when this is read, God bless you, and poor you when you had to work tomorrow. TLJ Screwjob says, thoughts on US bill to ban microtransactions? Again, I'm kind of opposed to government intervention in that. So I'm torn. I'm torn on that. I'm torn because I hate microtransactions with a fiery passion. And I hate that I know things like the stupid Diablo phone game are the future, because that's where they make so much money versus cost of development on those games that's where they're going. I hate it, but I don't know.
I think at the same time you have a little bit of correction where if everybody's doing microtransactions, then you have a great game that doesn't do that. A lot of people will go for that one too. So I think that there's always going to be a market for games that don't do that.
I hope you're right. I really
it might be on a smaller scale though, but yeah.
I really don't want the government to come in and ban microtransactions. I don't want them to do that. I know the motivation for it, and I agree with the motivation. I just don't want the government to do it because I don't know what else they're going to ban. And I just hate it. But at the same time, God, I hate them. God of Plague says, I don't think I mind for MMORPGs. You know they'll die eventually and need a lot of players going in, but single player shouldn't be a service. I pretty much agree with that.
Hey, there's still, I mentioned the video, there are people still playing Star Wars Galaxies. That ended 7, 8 years ago. They're
Right.
playing on the emulator. I mean, I'm all for letting games die naturally, you know? If people want to play them, hey, you play Battletoads. I mean, that's single player, but if it's a multiplayer, you and your friends like what? Oh, I think Asheron's Call that shut down a year or two ago, and they showed like this, guy in his 60s or something who was playing it. That was his game, and he played with the community there. So I
Yeah.
just, I'm against artificially killing it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tomato Bread Orgasm says, Ross, I appreciate your pragmatic approach. You just want them to stop killing games, and sticking to that message is very smart. All I can do
Yeah.
is vote with my wallet. I will never buy a game as a service. There you go. Patchouli says, I have a couple Divix movies. Nice coasters. Yeah, really, really a shame. Angel Ren 89 says, Rip, Pro Jared, and every other scum who cheats on their significant other. I haven't seen idiocy of this caliber since Boulder Boy. Who dumps their spouse on Twitter? It's not a good plan. Not a good plan. Flandre Scarlet says, in a similar vein, what's y'all's opinion of games that cannot be sold new, i.e. digitally, due to licensing issues with real-world IP? Any Ace Combat game with an F-117 in it and RUSE come to mind. I hate it, but I'm not sure if there's anything we can do. So Ace Combat can't be sold if it's got an F-117 in it due to a licensing issue?
Yeah, sometimes, well, that happens in car games a lot too, where they have the license to use like a Porsche or Ferrari, but it might expire after 10 years and they can't sell the game. Or with music, with licensed music, that can happen too. I think Alan Wake or Crazy Taxi, that was an issue for.
That's really weird with like a model of a car or whatever, because if I'm buying a Porsche, I'm not buying a picture of a Porsche. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but you're using their intellectual property if they only wanted to license it for whatever years.
Yeah, I just think that's weird because
That's a muddy territory, I think.
yeah. I mean, with music, it's a little bit different because someone could, I guess, technically put that music on a disc and sell it, whereas a picture of a Porsche is just a picture of a Porsche. Like I can open a Road and Track and look at their IP. So I don't know. That's a weird one to me.
Yeah.
Angel Ren 89 says, press F for Pro Jared's reputation and sub count. Angel Ren 89 says, who is dumber, Mundane Matt, or Pro Jared? Discuss. John Sargent says, there should be a better system. Updates / DLCs versus actual ability to play. I believe that server software should be available to heavy game consumers. Well, what about light game consumers? Are we
What about
talking
people who bought the game wanting to play it? I mean,
Yeah.
expecting to play. I mean, that's usually the idea behind buying a game.
I was mostly commenting on why only large people, but that was but I'm with you.
Oh, I missed it. Well,
No,
I'm a little tired. I'm up
No,
earlier than my usual.
You are, which again I really appreciate. Cass Michael says, "Give me a wrench and I'll give you another $2 one day." I'll give you a wrench anyway when I can find your name again. Caleb Black says, the biggest problem, in my opinion, with games as a service is that the industry will go with $20 worth of game, promising you'll get the other $40 worth later. That seems to be an issue.
Yeah. I feel like sorry.
No,
I
go
feel like
ahead.
the games industry has like almost trained me to wait. I mean, like, because you'll have sales, you have all these patches, you'll have all the DLC rolling the. I feel like all the messages that, or how many games have like day one patches to fix bugs? I mean, ideally, you were talking about like a complete game. If you're making a game completely competently, there should be no such thing as a day one patch because you've tested it to the best of your ability. Doesn't mean it won't have bugs. It just means you got all the ones you can find. So
Right.
but
I wonder what I don't know enough about the industry to know what like, and I also don't buy physical copies of games anymore for PC at least. I'm buying them on Steam or Good Old Games or whatever. But I wonder what the time window is from releasing a game where you're literally putting it on media and shipping to stores and the release date. Because I guess
Yeah. I know that's not how it operates, but
but I mean,
also
that's kind of how I mean, that's the whole idea of the day one patch, though. And I mean, specifically with consoles, is that you're buying this thing, and then presumably it's put on a DVD or whatever, and you go buy it at the store, and then you take it home or the Blu-ray, and you put it in the machine, and then it has to do the day one patch to catch up. So there's, I would suspect, some lag period between the actual production
oh
and
yeah, I'm sure they keep
release
it
date.
down to the wire. I was also going to say physical and digital don't mean what they used to now, too. Because I mean, games like if you buy on console like Destiny, The Division, or The Crew, those are all online only games. If you don't have that connection, they are coasters. Whereas
Right.
you mentioned GOG, man, you download that, you back it up however you want, you have that for life. They can't take it away from you, you know?
Right, and
So,
that's another interesting thing. A
it,
DRM free game, even though you may not have a physical thing to touch, is physical because it's on your hard drive. Because you own that particular
yeah, or
instance
you
of the
copy it
game.
somewhere else, you know? I mean, it's back it
Right.
up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Crusader Saracen says a politician with the little toddler and baby who strutted in during his conference call was actually some think tank academic talking about North Korea, and the woman was actually his wife. God, that clip was hilarious. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's a good clip.
Patchouli says, as an example of no one can ever run the game, the Mac OS port of Metal Gear Rising had an always online DRM by a company that exclusively hosted it and went bankrupt. Fun. Inoshiro says, I miss City of Heroes. Okay. Excuse me.
This goes back to the MMO thing, man. Some people want their game. They have their community. They'll keep it going for decades, man.
Yeah, they really will. This one says, hey, Nick, this is from CyberSlayer128. Sorry if you already heard, but looks like Jesse Pridemore is trying to get involved in the Pro Jared poop storm. Yeah, well, Jesse Pridemore needs to not be involved in anything. Night of OPEC says, I don't necessarily want Congress to force game developers to sell perpetual licenses either. Forcing transparency is the best we can do. Patent and copyright law need to be reformed. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. I want to go ahead and put it out there that you're not going to get a patent and copyright law reform.
See, this is useful to hear from an attorney. That's what I thought, but it carries more weight coming from an attorney, I think. It knows
I mean, the people who get, Lior covered this as well, the people who get the patent and the copyright law reform is Disney, and it's only to extend their IP. That's it, and they have it so close to perpetual that it's crazy. You're what are you gonna do? Here's the thing. Let's say someone made something and they're planning on, they're gonna own it for 75 years now. Well, and then you go in and change it to 20. Okay, did they lose that 55 years that they should have? Because when they made it, then wait, do you grandfather it? How do you track all this stuff? I mean, you're gonna have a hard time reducing the window of copyright ownership. Owning technology and content forever is onerous and prohibitive on society. No one owns tech forever. The patent system is different. It is limited to that 20 years, and it is actually hard to game. But copyright isn't.
skeletons before.
Yeah.
TLJ that goes away,
TLJ Screwjob says Alpha Protocol came out in 2009. I bought it on May 25th, 2012 for $8.55 with tax. I have the receipt in the case. Played through it 9 to 10 times. It is a buggy game, but I can still play it. Not if it was online only. There you go. Bad Dragonite says, Nick, you should watch Freeman's Mind by your guest. Yeah, I'm going to. Skeleton says, my boy Ross on my favorite Law stream. This has been a weird and awesome year for streams. I got to say, absolutely love your Freeman's Mind series, Ross. Been a fan for so many years. God bless. Let's see. Colin Schrader says, I'm torn on this. Software is a moving target. It takes maintenance to keep something working, even static code. either the dev does it or you dump that on the user to try and recreate the environment. I actually don't necessarily agree with that, because what if I have my computer? I have a computer that runs the original copy of Daggerfall from 1990 whatever. I have that. I have a Pentium 2 333 sitting on my shelf that can run that copy of Daggerfall, and nothing that can happen will change, other than equipment breakdown, will change the ability of Daggerfall to run on that computer. Now, I can't necessarily take that copy of Daggerfall, put it into my current computer and run it. I have to get DOSBox, I have to get emulators, I have to do all sorts of stuff to do that. But that's not what anybody's asking for.
Exactly. Like in another video I mentioned, I have a Rip Van Winkle test. You know, let's say you buy the game, you have your computer or console, whatever, and then you sleep for 20 years, but it's all kept perfectly preserved. When you turn it on again, can you run that game? And see, games as a service, it's like the answer is like almost certainly not. And there's a huge difference between not being able to run it because, again, there's a new version of Windows and there's some incidental incompatibility versus locking all doors on all possibilities of ever running it. I mean, this is a very much an active prevention of you running your game by keeping that encrypted and keeping the data needed to run the game off the server. So yeah, keeping games running on modern equipment and software, yeah, that can take maintenance, but that's not what's being argued at all, you know?
Right, and no one's asking the game companies to do that. I mean,
No.
the idea is that and I mean, thank goodness for DOSBox and GOG, because I don't have to take that computer off the shelf to play an old computer game anymore. But if I want to, or if GOG shuts down tomorrow or something like that happens, or DOSBox gets loses all support and is no longer runnable, whatever it is, I can always turn on that computer as long as it will run. I can plug in that CD-ROM for Daggerfall or Master of Magic or Master of Orion 1, and I can install them and play them right then.
Well,
and nothing.
and you have a reasonable chance is the thing. Like even if things go wrong, you know, the passage of time can kind of work its way in different ways, but you have that chance. Like everybody has, you're not shutting off 100% of people who bought Daggerfall, you know?
Right, exactly. Okay, we've got where did it go? Dex Luther says the arguments from the companies is, if we let you run your EverQuest server, then some people aren't going to buy EverQuest 2? If that's their argument, that's a bad argument. The reason people
I kind of dismissed that more as kind of a conspiracy theory when I went to the video. Since I made that completely unverified, so take it how you will, I've had an email from someone anonymous saying they've worked at AAA industry, and they said for their company at least, that actually was a model, because the idea being that if you're playing EverQuest 1, you're not playing EverQuest 2, you may not even drift to the new game, but it's at least increasing the odds of like how many available, you know, so eyeballs there are for the new game. I think that's such a small ratio of people, though, that it wouldn't. One, I'm still in doubts that's the case for the majority of companies doing this, even though I can believe one or two do it. And two, that's, man, the people who want look, your average game consumer, they're going to want to buy what their friends are playing currently or what's new and has commercials for it and looks cool. You know, I think that's where the bulk of the sales come from. The people, look, even though there's people speed running Super Mario, I think the majority of people are not playing Super Mario right at the moment, you know? It's
Right.
it's kind of like a stacking. It's like the long tail, you know. It's a stacking niches, the things that people like.
And I've got to disagree with you, because you can only actually buy or own one game ever.
Oh, okay. Well,
I guess you weren't aware of that.
I haven't caught up to the present yet, you know, or the future.
Yeah, and that's what people actually do. So they buy one game, they never buy anything new, because they just play that one game. Like that one guy with Asheron's Call was all he ever played, and now he's dead.
Well, yeah, that was the case for him. Yeah.
That's the average consumer. That's all other consumers as well. Colin Schrader says, yes, you are entitled to the game at your time of purchase. Yeah, I agree. And Colin Schrader says, as in entitled forever minus updates. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. I think I do. Skeleton says, completely agree here. Phantasy Star Online Blue Burst was no longer in operation, so private servers cropped up to host a game that was literally dead. Sega went after the private servers anyway. Of course they did, because they're not smart. Yeah. These companies aren't smart. I'm gonna analogize it this way. I went to a concert, and oh, it was Pentatonics. It was Pentatonics. They're a vocal a cappella group or whatever. I went to their concert, and they did a song that they don't actually sell. And so, I pulled out my phone and tried to record a clip of the song, and a lady came up and yelled at me and told me to put it away. So, okay, fine. I put my phone away. Then I went to a Garth Brooks concert, and Garth Brooks doesn't even have his music on like Google Play or anything else like that. You can only buy the literal physical copies of it.
LPs.
And Garth Brooks, people are up in the front row with their cameras out. At one point, he's like, "Get your phones out and record this song." And like, there's this completely different thing, and it's like, what? He's a much bigger artist. His music is actually harder to access than these other people, but he's realized that it's probably more beneficial for him to embrace the fact that people are doing a stupid recording of a live show. And some people were recording like the entire live show, but that's not impacting his record sales in a negative way. If anything, it's probably increasing record sales because they might put that grainy, crappy song up, and someone goes, "Oh wait, I want to hear what the actual one sounds like." And
you mentioned the creator earlier. Look, most of the time, these decisions are not made by the creators; they're made by the rights holders. Those are two different things. In fact, I would argue that if it was up to the developers, so not management of the companies, but the people who actually coded the game, I bet that would drop this practice of games being killed by 80%. Like I think if the people who actually created the game, as opposed to funded it, everything, made the decision on whether it survives, I think it would huge difference on whether the game
well,
survives.
I mean, they would have the they could sneak into the code some sort of dead man switch, or I don't know. We can't call it a dead man switch.
Well, I mean, if you spent something years of your life on something, I mean, it's like, yeah, you might, and people enjoy it. Maybe you want to let them have it and have something to show for what you did.
Right, exactly. Let's see. Here we go. Where were we? Oh, here we go. Oscar Martinez says, I haven't watched your last couple of streams yet, and I was wondering if you know about the quartering settling on his lawsuit. Yes, I do. Good job, Jeremy Hambley. Very, very happy for him to have settled that lawsuit, and it seems like things went in a good way. Sam Everyman says, what about games that you buy and then get banned from, effectively making them unplayable for you? I'm opposed to banning from anything that you're paying for, but I don't know what to.
I had ideas on that. Like, let's say we did require some sort of end of life plan. You could have two options. Well, it depends how you want to juggle it. One could be you're banned until they release the end of life plan, in which case you get restored. But that's still, you still bought the game, and let's say you got banned unfairly. One, if you want to be just completely in line with everything, I think companies have, at least one company's done this before. Okay, you're banned from the main server. Now you get to go to the banned server. And I think they did that for some people where they were running cheats and everything. They just threw all the cheaters in one place. It was kind of like an Escape from New York sort of situation where it's like, okay, well, you still have access to the game, but since you broke our policy, like, you're not on the mainstream service anymore. You're in there with all the other cheaters or people saying stuff that's going to get you banned or something. So that's one way you could handle it.
Yeah, I think that should happen. That's like going to Gab. From Twitter. That's a joke. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. I don't get all the references. It's fine.
Well, Gab is like the Twitter alternative, and what all the people who get banned off of Twitter
Okay. I see.
go to Gab. So it's like it's purported to be like an alt-right haven. It's kind of funny. Sam Everyman says, "What about games that you buy?" Oh wait, I read that one. Kerman SR says, "Try Lagavulin Distillers Edition, aged in sherry casks. Some island malts don't mix well with sherry, but this is amazing. Like Balmore Darkest, but better." Ooh. You're speaking my language. Hessian says, "Thoughts on Sony and Blizzard shutting down users' accounts, nuking their library? Makes me sympathetic to free software guys. Most of always online is just fancy DRM. It's dying and bricking your game is the dickiest act. How about selling server software?" Yeah, we talked about that. And I think that those things are particularly nefarious. Like if Steam just decided that you couldn't access your Steam library because you violated some term of use, which I think they technically could, that would be really, really ridiculous.
I think EA's done that before with Origin. I'm not sure.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised if Steam has done it at some point too. I just haven't looked into it. Colin Schrader says, "Greedy lawyer hasn't read a single one of my cogent super chats." Oh, yeah. The DJD show, thanks for the donation. Knight of Hopex says, "My idea would be to have the Library of Congress get the software companies to give them what it takes to run all the games. And if games go out of service, make a law where once they're gone for 5 years, anyone can set up a support service for them." That timeline is so long, though, for me. I think that's
I'd say like a year or two. I mean,
I wanted immediate. When the game goes unsupported, why do we then preserve their right to keep that instance of the game? Again, this doesn't transfer intellectual property rights to people or allow them to suddenly make a sequel just because they stop supporting one game.
Well, maybe they screwed up with the servers or the bills or something. They need new backers, and they're gonna get it, but it takes them a couple months.
You have 8 minutes. You have 8 minutes. This is the internet. Get on there, find a Chinese server, and set it up. I don't care. It's not my problem. No, I think this is a good step. And yeah, if it's 5 years, if it's 1 year, if it's 2 months, whatever it may be, it is certainly a step. But again, this all could be avoided with some sort of thing. But who knows? Tomato Bread Orgasm says, "Ultimately, Ross wants us to preserve the strange lands presented in these games. There's a more artistic purpose behind the legal stuff." And yeah, that's true. Timothy Reaper says, "Has Arms Girl tried to sue you yet?" No, not yet. I heard she got her retainer money. I mean, $1,500 is not enough to sue. It really isn't. Black D Dragon says, "Nick, what do you think about paying for microtransactions for virtual property like skins and items, and then the game shuts down, you lose access to your virtual property?" I have a problem with that. I really do.
And actually, if those are again, it may have no weight in court, but if those are considered perpetual licenses, I'd say that one's even a bigger violation than just the normal game shutdown, because at least that one you have your game client. Whereas if you paid for that sword or the skin, that has literally been removed from you. You don't have access at all to it anymore.
Right. And that's an interesting thing, because I think people are hesitant to apply the actual. Man, this might be like a really long topic, so I'm only going to briefly address it here. But your property rights are like Siegfried. No, that's a bad joke. Property rights are like a bundle. It's a bundle of different. They described it in property law as a bundle of sticks. Okay, it's not my fault. It's not my fault, but it's a bundle of sticks.
Yeah, well, the problem is you're American and not British, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, but property rights are a bundle of sticks, and each stick is a different property right. And when you have all of the sticks, you own something in what's called fee or fee simple. And then when you give when you give sticks away from the bundle, that doesn't mean that you gave up the bundle, but it just means that you've given away certain rights. And so there is this long sort of there's this long sort of conversation that I guess you could get into about what stick are you buying, and are you aware that you're buying a stick? Because like the main property rights that you have the right to own something, ownership. You have the right of possession, which is separate from ownership. Like when you rent something, you possess it even though you don't own it, and then you lose that right of possession and give it back. You have the right of exclusive use of something, which is different. So that's the right to exclude people from accessing the thing that you have. And then you have the right of alienability. Those are the four main sticks. And that's the right to sell or dispose of the property at your leisure. And, we're so used to, in a consumer economy that we're in, trading in fee on goods that we buy, right? This is the goods versus service argument, but said in a little bit different way. When I go to the store and I buy a can of Coke off the shelf, I'm buying it in fee. I have the right to own it and possess it and consume it, so alienability, and I have the right to prevent you from having a sip. When
we're less used to having to split, I guess.
Right, and so, but when we go and buy a game off the shelf, even though it's sold in the exact same way, or even when it is sold in the exact same way as any other good that we buy, we're not buying all four sticks. Well, it's actually more sticks, but they're just lesser rights.
Actually, this reminds me, someone messaged me with a legal concept. I think it's called trespass to chattels.
Sure.
Or something. Or the idea being that, like, let's say I sell you a cow or sell you access to the milk or something, but it's on my property, and hey, you can't come on my property. But like, so it's like, even though I sold it to you, I'm finding ways to keep you from having what you bought, and that's a real solid analogy for it.
Yeah, it is a good analogy, and it's weird because we've so divorced the idea of these property rights because we don't operate in that way anymore. Except in like real property, houses and stuff like that. That's where we're used to dividing up rights. Well, I buy this, but I give an easement to the city to put a sidewalk in front of my house. That's or I get an easement to the cable company to run a line under my under the ground to give me access to internet or whatever. So we're used to doing that with real property, but we're not so used to doing that with something that you go into a store and buy. And so I think that's also where the conversation comes in. But again, that's
it's so extreme though. It's like, okay, we put a sidewalk in front of your house. We don't take your actual house, or if we do, you're compensated,
Right.
Like,
and they can't build if the city's building a giant wall, they can't build a wall across your driveway unless they put a gate on it. That only that you have access to. They can't exclude you from your own property. Exactly. Okay, so Scarfy the Strange says, fraud or no, games as a service is an inevitability since a lot of consumers won't invest as much for high-end gaming machines. I don't actually believe that is true. A streaming service can eliminate the cost barrier by running all the hard work from a cloud server. No, I disagree because I don't think you're getting the same product from I mean, maybe Google's going to prove me wrong, but like a AAA game that you're going to run at max, at like a Crisis when it came out, that computers couldn't even run at max settings. That's not what you're going to be buying on these servers.
I'd say you go far enough in the future, you might get something. It could happen on some levels. I mean, you're not going to have like the exact same like response time, but by then most people may not care. So that's what I'm trying to stop is why do we have to trade in all our rights with the new technology? It's the week following making that video, I've never felt more like a Luddite. So, it's yeah. I mean, and again, I'm not against streaming as options. So that's the other thing. Like, if you want to just rent games, that's fine. But it's like when you remove the option of ownership entirely, that's kind of new territory, I think. So
yeah, and again, these can be different products. Like we can be okay with a streaming only service as long as people know that it's a streaming only service, and that can be distinct from me going to Walmart and buying StarCraft 2 and installing it on my computer. Those are two different things. So, Keldo the Horse says, do you think we need a hard reset on gaming? No, I don't think so. I think, here's what I actually think. I think ultimately
it could be even worse.
Right.
Actually.
Yeah. One, we might be consolidating power and the players with enough money to really take it over at that point. No, I think the indie gaming stuff that we're seeing on services like Steam really does present the alternative, right? These indie games are coming out. They are DRM free in a lot of ways, and they provide competition to AAA titles, even though they're significantly less produced. But those production divergent lines are actually coming together as technology becomes more and more accessible, and people are able to make really high quality indie games now with a pretty moderate team that do rival in some ways these AAA games. I mean, heck, I'm probably going to get this wrong, but wasn't what was it? I can't think of the stupid name of it. I own it. Kingdom Come Deliverance. Wasn't that made with a pretty small team?
Oh wow, yeah, that one. I haven't played it, but just the screenshots, that one rivaled.
Yeah, I think
I mean, that's the best looking forest I've seen in a game. Although I think they might have toned it down for the final.
Yeah, but
I was looking at that.
I'm pretty sure that was made by a small team, and you do have small teams making games. Outward is one that's being mentioned. Yeah, Outward is a massive sandbox RPG akin to like a Skyrim that was made by a small team.
Yeah, I heard about that.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think that maybe they're gonna push the market to solve the problem that way. Austin Heartless says hashtag Make America Games Again. Bagel Goose says thank you, Ross, for the foot. So very happy that you showed your foot on camera.
Yeah, I can do weird. I can do a few weird requests. I have my own limits.
Sure. I have many limits. Bagel Goose follows up with feet as a service. Thomas Ochiwija. Yeah.
We've opened Pandora's box here, maybe.
Yeah, I think you may not have understood what you were walking into on that one.
I maybe don't. And you know what? That's fine. Ignorance is bliss, You have
12 issues or 12 web pages on Wikipedia now already.
Yeah, I may get some odd emails. We'll see.
A thing, the law text /EULA dev/producer telling the customer that they can shut down the game at any time happens after purchase, and you can't return them to the shop because you already used the key. I think you technically can. And again, well, at least in the US, there was a lawsuit about this, that there is a reasonable time window following installation that you can get a refund, but you can't do it from the store. You have to do it from the manufacturer. It's a super arduous process. And the court basically did it, and they're like, well, we fixed that problem.
I need to confirm this, but it sounds like Australia might be really good on that front. I think even these games that have been shut down, if you have the receipt, you might be able to get a refund through the Australian Consumer Commission. I'll have to check. I mean, not that helps Americans, but
right.
It means there's some hope out there.
Let's see. Angel Rin 89 says, watch Medicare's coverage of Pro Jared. It's a riot. I will, but not now. Locust Sola says, Pro Jared had a Tumblr where he asked for nudes and sent his nudes. Minor might be involved. That's not good. That's not good. Don't do that.
I couldn't have, I make videos where actors do lines. I couldn't have asked for a better rendition of that. That takes perfect. That's not good.
John Sargent says server license to private users at day one. License a server license to private users at day one and let companies focus on DLC, etc., without fear of MMOs, etc., dying artificially. I guess they could do that. There's other issues, though. I can see why they'd want to maintain control of that, in all honesty. Gaku says, do you plan on having a stream with Leonard French? You did a stream with French, right?
Yeah. I have to relook at it. I'm not sure how much, that's why I wanted to make that kind of disclaimer about the fraud against the customer versus fraud against the government. I think some of what he might have been arguing might have been on the customer front, which wasn't the argument I was trying to make. I mean, I still think they're doing wrong by the customer, but I I I, I don't think there's enough meat there legally to argue that from what I saw. He was taking more of the interp- the kind of strict interpretation approach that because what strict I'm flanking out again. That because like you were talking about like patent law versus copyright law,
Sure.
like if it doesn't exist in the present, if it doesn't exist within those confines, then that's no precedent for it to carry over to another aspect. That's mostly what I got from his take. But here's the thing though, talking to these different attorneys, the what people kind of seem on consensus that this isn't going to go very far in the courts, if at all. And see that's what I'm trying to determine with this. So it's like even if I am right, if it doesn't matter, then that's useful to know that, or
It's
if it's in a gray area, but the law is only going to push it in one direction, then that's worth knowing. So that's kind of why I'm talking to everybody about this. So
it's
the attorney.
it's a hard thing. It's really easy to be pessimistic about the courts. Um, but the good thing about the courts is that if you win everything, right? You win big. You win
Yeah.
big. But you'd have to pick the right target. It would cost a fortune.
Yeah, well, that automatic. I'm almost automatically crossing off options that
Well, see, that's why I recommend like
cost
the
a
EF.
fortune.
The EFF would, if the EFF
Yeah,
saw
yeah,
potential, they would do it. Like they'd pay for it and they'd run it. That's the
well, yeah,
benefit of
but yeah,
organizations like
I'm
them.
absolutely gonna contact them.
Yeah,
I've just been trying to find out the best way to go about it, but
yeah. And I don't mean
I
to
think I'm
sound
getting there.
I don't mean to sound like I'm harping on you about the EFF. By the way, I see. I'm
No, 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 no. I put it in my video on the little cheat sheets.
yeah.
Possible organizations to contact. I listed them there.
I just feel like I'm like call the EFF. That's not what
Yeah,
I'm
I'll do
doing.
that within the week, actually.
King Star 900 says, just want to support my favorite lawyer / YouTuber. Keep doing you. And for your guest, thanks for coming on Nick's show. So there you go. Ponycraft says, hey, did you get the email I told you about on Facebook? Maybe, but I don't know. I'll check. Butthole Weeb says, any space for a drunk anime stream soon? You got an anime expert right here at your service. Also, it's Mealy. It's also so Mealy, Nick. P.S. Miss you. Yes, I was just talking about a new type of anime stream that where I gather a cast of people, we pick an anime, we all watch it, and then come back and give our reviews of it or something like that. I'll hit you up on that. Timmy Carl says, what is your thought on Soulja Boy selling unlicensed games? Because I think it justifies why Nintendo is strict on their IP. Well, that was a weird thing that Soulja Boy was doing.
Yeah, that's probably a lot easier to interpret the law on that one.
Yeah, that was just not a good not a good look. Not a good look at all. Skeleton says Steam was banning users and they lose access to their libraries until someone sued them over it. If I recall, it even established precedent regarding bannings preventing access to products paid for. I'll have to look that case up. I feel like I heard something about that, but I don't know for sure. And I don't know how it turned out and what the arguments were. Rama says EA, aka Studio Serial Killer, has been known to kill people's accounts for reasons even their support has no clue about. Says a lot about Origin Services. Shadow Kane says COH 24 free expansions, or City of Heroes / 1 paid City of Villains. And then Ariel Fetter says one of the biggest problems for gamer rights and game quality is that you have to sign away your rights in the EULA after purchase. Yep, and again, there may be some protection there, but it's not good, it's not accessible, it's not convenient to the consumer. Joshua Ryan, thanks for the donation. And Ponycraft says the email was about this, had a chat with Ross too. Awesome. I probably did get it then, but email names and and screen names being different. So, well, man, that's all the chats. Did you have any? I guess any follow up for me, or should we? This stream's been going 3 hours. We could probably wrap it up.
I think I asked everything I needed to.
All right,
yeah,
man.
well, EFF is the last hope from me.
Yeah,
but by all means, yeah, don't think I have to be the leader on this and like, oh, if I'm.
Oh, you are.
I would have loved for someone else to spearhead this. I only did that video because I feel like nothing was gonna happen without it.
No, you have to lead because we have to know who Blizzard gets to guillotine later.
Sure.
You get to be Louis or whatever.
Although Blizzard is kind of, I'm not sure Blizzard has. See, Blizzard's riding that line where I don't think they've ever actually shut down any of their games. Like even online, I think even right now you could still go online with Diablo 1 or Warcraft 2 or something. So
well,
it's like, man, it's like they really are doing that. Yeah, we'll just keep it running forever thing.
Yeah, as long as BattleNet runs, then all of those old games seem to run. The question, I mean, the big question will be, will they ever stop supporting Diablo 3? Because I think that's the first one that truly requires the online play. The first of
in every sense, yeah.
Right. So, all right. Well, why don't I'm going to start playing outro music. And
people were saying to kick me and call the EFF. So.
No, I'm gonna kick myself off the stream here too. So, oh wait, no, I can't do the outro music with a guest because I boomered that up, and I have to figure that out. So what I'll say is thank you all for watching. Ross, if you want to hang up just a minute, I like to personally say goodbye after the stream ends. But I've got the Accursed Farms channel in the description. Go check out Ross's content. Make sure to support it, and if you're interested in this stuff, follow the rabbit trails on where to go with this. Talk to.
Well, again, this is the only issue I'm tackling. Everything else is just going to be goofier videos. So.
Right, but I mean, like, if you're into this games as a service thing, talk to game developers that you may know. You probably actually interact with some of them on Twitter and stuff. I'm gonna talk to Mark Kern about it and see kind of what his take is, or I'll ask him if Mark will talk to me about it when he has time, to see his take on it from a developer standpoint, and talk to your legislature if this is an important matter to you. There are avenues we can do to fight this. It's not, Ross doesn't have to do all of it, or really any of it.
Ross will do what he thinks is possible.
You've done a ton, man. Making a video seen by that many people is actually that, like, who else does that?
Well, nobody was covering this topic, in the land of the blind, the man with one eye is king. That's kind of why it has the views it does.
That's how it goes. So. Well, the latest amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the one that prevents Congress from increasing their own pay while they're in the same session, or while they're in their same term. So they can increase their pay, but their pay increase doesn't go into effect until they get reelected. Technically, it was one guy who made that amendment happen. That amendment was actually almost passed back when the original Bill of Rights was passed, but like 1 or 2 states didn't ratify it that were needed. And so he started this one guy was researching it. He found this thing and he's like, oh my God, this thing's actually close. All I need to do is lobby a couple states to adopt this, and then we've got the majority needed to make this an actual constitutional amendment. It was just one guy. No one had been talking about this thing for almost 200 years, and one guy did it.
At one point I was living in Louisiana in I think it was 2007. That's all it was in the news, because like the state Congress they were pushing this through emergency relief. It was gonna like double or triple their salary, acting effective immediately for like the state Congress. That was not making them popular in the news.
Yeah, that's a good amendment, because it does not look at, well, I need to be paid more. Look, I need to be paid more of your money right
now. Yeah.
But all right, man. Well, let's wrap this up. There are 3 final chats that did come in. Buttle Weeb says, "Fecking tell me, Nick, DM me. Knowing you, I doubt you get to this anime review stream. I'm here, brother. No, it's not just you who wants me to do it. Lots of people do. I'm thinking in the next week or two, but I will. Also, remind me on Twitter. Bug me in DMs and stuff. Skeleton says, following that legal confrontation I mentioned, Valve then implemented a library transfer system from account to account in case you were banned. And Asia Fraser says, boo, no. So, all right, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Ross, did you want to plug anything else before we go, or are we just good?
No, we're good. I can't think. I'm going in and out of like conscious thought.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on this early, man. All right, guys. Have a good night. I'm closing this thing out. Peace. Peace.